Chapter 161-Desperate Zaluria Palace. Well. Shalulia Palace opened her eyes and looked around in confusion. Just woke up, so that her own consciousness has not recovered, her head is still dizzy, and she has not fully woken up. In the dark secret room, only her own existence exists. Only empty, dead silence, loneliness. In an instant, she regained her sanity, her beautiful eyes widened, round and round, staring at the surrounding environment. Into the eye, everything is dead, not living. Here, it is like a wasteland that no one cares about. In her memory, the last fainting scene gradually appeared in her mind. Liang. Shalulia Palace's eyes flashed, and she gritted her silver teeth, and her expression gradually became particularly angry. Anger burns in her heart. This man dared to do something to her, who is a Tianlong person, and it was obvious that he was being held here in a secret room. She is a dragonborn. She was actually detained here, which made her feel so embarrassed. How to escape? Shalulia Palace thought in her heart, her eyes rolled, and she quickly looked around. There is obviously a solid secret room around, and it is very difficult to escape from here. Although there was nothing to bind her or restrict her movement, the place was empty and there were no hard objects. How could you break the wall? Even if she has weapons, she is an ordinary woman, and she does not have the strength to break this place. The surrounding area is about 100 square meters. Apart from chairs and tables, there are not too many clutter. No sound. Everything made her feel a tingling in her scalp. It was so quiet, deadly quiet. Being imprisoned in this kind of secret room always challenges her heart's ability to bear. No, I'm going to get out of here. Shalulia Palace stood up with a resolute look on her pretty face, and said. She held the table, gritted her teeth and lifted it up, but she was still unable to support it. The table gradually fell to the ground, and she herself fell to the side. Not even the strength to lift the table. Immediately, Shalulia Palace was in despair, her eyes were infinitely enlarged, she looked at the surrounding walls, and trapped herself here. Fear spreads infinitely. Open it for me. Shalulia Palace held a chair and threw it violently to the wall. Boom. A crisp voice came out, and the chair broke open. However, the walls were unscathed, leaving no traces. Silence. Shalulia Palace's whole body was dumbfounded, her red lips trembled, her eyes were full of fear, her whole body trembled involuntarily, and she roared, "Let me get out of here, let me out of here." The shrill voice echoed back in this empty secret room. Gradually wandering, until disappearing. No one responded at all. Here, she was the only one, enjoying the loneliness that never existed. Boom, boom. The sudden sound of two subtle voices startled Zaluria Palace. She looked back at the corner and said in a panic, "Who is it? Come out for me, don't pretend to be a ghost, come out for me. I will never spare you, I will kill you." No one responded, no sign of life. No matter how she shouted, no one would answer her. She stayed in this secret room alone, and all she could feel was the boundless loneliness. Chapter 161-Desperate Zaluria Palace, 9/10 Please customize. She stayed in this secret room alone, and all she could feel was the boundless loneliness. The passage of time has been forgotten by her. Half an hour passed. Shalulia Palace's throat was hoarse, her eyes were red, and she was exhausted. For half an hour, she roared and shouted frantically, consuming a huge amount of physical strength. It was because of this that she was so tired that she lay on the ground, and her whole body was enveloped by the loneliness here, and the sense of fear became more and more unbearable for her. Her spirit was on the verge of collapse. "Let me out." Shalulia Palace's voice was hoarse. Sitting on the ground, her hair was disheveled, and her gorgeous white clothes were also stained with a little dust. Now she is like a little beggar begging. It is completely different from the rumored Tianlong people. Another half hour passed. Shalulia Palace held her knees with both hands, her body shrank, her body trembled, her eyes were full of fear, and she looked at her little white feet with orange nail polish. All I can feel here is the cold. There is no trace of life, let alone sunlight, only the faint light on the ceiling illuminates this place, and there is nothing else. There is nothing that can accompany her, the only one who can accompany her is herself. Don't do this, don't do this. Shalulia Palace was trembling all over, and her nervousness collapsed in fear. The corners of her mouth moved slightly and she muttered to herself, in a state of talking to herself. She, who was originally not strong in psychological quality, had fallen into despair after suffering this feeling of loneliness, and the fear of facing death was infinitely magnified. Even if there is a person here, this person is Li Ang, she will not be so afraid. Being alone in a secret room, enjoying the loneliness, is the most terrifying thing. At this time, Shalulia Palace could enjoy this loneliness, which gave her the bud of suicide, but she did not dare to commit suicide, so she could only force herself to endure this loneliness. Immediately after, she stood up with difficulty, bare white feet, walked on the floor, came to the back of the door in front, with a delicate white fist, bombarded the iron door. Let me out. 0. Boom, boom, boom. A crisp voice came out. 10 minutes later. Shalulia Palace's hands trembled, and her eyes looked at the blood stains on the iron gate with fear. She had broken both hands, but still couldn't shake the iron door in the slightest. At best, in addition to her identity as a Tianlong person, her own strength is simply worse than that of ordinary people. It hurts. Shalulia Palace's beautiful eyes turned red, tears could not be contained, and on her fist, which was as white as jade, blood was dripping, and the flesh was blurred. The tingling sensation made her sob unbearably. She shrank back to the corner again, hugging her knees tightly, her white shirt was stained red with blood, and she was in a state of embarrassment. Today, she no longer has the arrogant demeanor of the Tianlong people. Here, she is the only one. Even if she is arrogant, no one will hear her words. Only she herself can save herself. If you can't save yourself, the only thing waiting for her is death. Li Ang, where are you? I beg you, please spare me, let me out, I don't want to stay here any longer, let me out. Shalulia Palace's red lips moved slightly, and she roared, her beautiful eyes turning red. Now whatever she was asked to do, she would agree. Feeling this sense of loneliness made her collapse directly. Any psychological defense is vulnerable. Chapter 162_Be tame and obedient. 10 out of 10 beg for customization. In a dimly lit environment. Shalulia Palace stayed alone in the secret room, feeling the boundless darkness and loneliness. Her big eyes were red and swollen, and her delicate face was no longer arrogant. Today, she has put aside the dignity of the so-called Tianlong people. Plop, sound. She fell to the ground, her red lips trembling, her whole face was full of fear, and she kept looking around, for fear that something terrible might be approaching her. The lights on the ceiling gradually flickered and the light disappeared. Darkness came, and I couldn't see my fingers. No, no. Shalulia Palace's eyes were full of fear, and she roared, don't turn off the lights, I'm so scared, Li Ang, come out, you give me roughness. I know you are here, come out. A sharp voice echoed in this empty environment. However, no one responded. Only her hoarse voice that had no 700 inches support was gradually lost. The secret room, back to the quiet atmosphere. A clock. 2 bells. Time is constantly passing. Hunger. Shalulia Palace herself looked haggard, clinging to the wall, unable to bear the hunger. Her hands gradually became cold, and her whole body trembled. When a person is hungry to a certain point, consciousness begins to diminish. At this time, Shalulia Palace was feeling a life experience that she had never felt in her life. You are a Tianlong person, when can you try the feeling of hunger? There is no food that appeals to her, and she will even kill the chef and throw away all the food. But now she, even if there is something unpalatable, she will devour it. The situation is different, and the person will change accordingly. The spirit of Shalulia Palace has collapsed, and the desperate situation she faces is the nightmare of her life. The eyelids are getting heavier. She was a little shaky, shaking her head. At this time, crunch. The huge iron door gradually opened. A dazzling light shone in, illuminating the scene inside. Shalulia Palace hadn't seen the sun for several hours, and she was stabbed so hard that she couldn't open her eyes. She wanted to block the sun with her hands, but she was unable to raise them. She was so weak that she couldn't move. Ta-ta-ta. A burst of footsteps lingered in her ears, and she could only vaguely see a figure approaching her position. And this person, obviously, is Li Ang himself. Only a few hours. Can't stand it. Li Ang looked at the weak Zaluria Palace and shook his head. Ordinary people, at least, can bear it in one day. But Shalulia Palace, as a Tianlong person, she couldn't bear it for even a day. It can be seen that in terms of physical fitness, Tianlong people are even worse than ordinary people. That is equivalent. Nothing but identity. Water, water. Shalulia Palace's red lips were dry. She looked at Li Ang dimly, and said weakly. She was on the verge of a coma and was struggling to keep herself from falling. Li Ang slowly spread out his hands and hugged the soft body of Shalulia Palace, very light, and with a single step, he gradually left the dark secret room. After half an hour. Chapter 162_tamed and obedient post 10 out of 10 please customize. After half an hour. In a house. On the cushion, a woman in a white shirt gradually opened her eyes. Shalulia Palace looked at the clean ceiling, the dazzling light made her feel warm. But, still weak, she couldn't move. My clothes. She glanced at the clothes she was wearing, her expression dull. Clothes that should have been stained with stains turned out to be brand new and completely different. The snow-white clothes, with a few buttons left unbuttoned, revealed her white as jade collarbone, and even the bulging Yuyu Zongnu loomed, which was truly charming. After seeing her clothes, she had some guesses in her heart, and her whole body froze. Who changed it for me? Besides Li Ang, who else is there? Think of this. Shalulia Palace's red lips gradually trembled. She was actually seen by a man who she thought was untouchable. Even, was touched by the other party. Immediately, her mood fluctuated violently, her breathing became messy, and a look of anger appeared on her delicate face. Ta-ta-ta. Footsteps came. She glanced at it, and saw that Li Ang was holding a cup, smiling, and gradually approaching. You, what did you change for me? Shalulia Palace's voice trembled and she cried a little. Heard. Li Ang nodded lightly and said with a smile, besides me, is there anyone else to help you change your clothes? But I have to admit, your figure is quite good. You. Shalulia Palace's beautiful eyes widened, round and round, with an extremely angry expression, and shouted, you damn pariah, how dare you look at my body? Unforgivable. You forgot the experience in the secret room. Li Ang walked to the side of Zaluria Palace, sat next to the other party, smelled the fragrance of the other party's body, smiled and said meaningfully. Hearing this sentence, Shalulia Palace was stunned. Recalling the terrifying experience in the secret room, the sense of fear in her heart was infinitely magnified, and the pictures she had forgotten before came to her mind more clearly. For a while, she didn't dare to speak anymore. Her whole body was trembling, her pretty face was pale, her eyes were looking at Li Ang, and the sense of fear could not be concealed on her face. You have to understand one thing at all times. In front of me, you are just a weak woman with no strength. The identity of a Tianlong person is not easy to use here. Li Ang reached out and rubbed the smooth orange hair of Zaluria Palace, and said with a smile. The corner of Shalulia Palace's mouth trembled for a while, and her mood followed. Looking at Li Ang, she said in horror, what will you do to me? Are you going to kill me? Don't worry, I won't kill you. Li Ang withdrew his right hand and handed the cup in his hand. If you are obedient, I will not touch you at all. But if you still insist on the identity of the so-called Tianlong person, then I will not let you understand the cruelty of reality. Quote. I'll be obedient. Shalulia Palace was full of fear and said quickly. The identity of Tianlong people is useless. She no longer dared to mention the Tianlong people, nor did she dare to threaten Li Ang too much. If it was like this at first, wouldn't it be over? Li Ang smiled and said, drinking the water will relieve your physical condition. Yeah. Shalulia Palace didn't have too many words. She picked up the cup and drank it, daring not to disobey Li Ang's words. Seeing that Shalulia Palace's attitude of disregarding the people in the world from its original arrogance, gradually became as cute as a cat. The corners of Li Ang's mouth twitched slightly, and his eyes flickered. It seems that it is not so difficult to tame the Tianlong people. Chapter 163 _ The inexplicable pirate group with guns. Even the Shalulia Palace was so arrogant and fearless before, a Tianlong woman who had no fear of anyone in the world. After going through Li Ang's methods, he still became as well behaved as a cat. Aside from identity, Tianlong people are inferior to ordinary people. Whether it is physical quality or spiritual will, it must be reflected worse than ordinary people. For example, in the Shalulia Palace trapped in the secret room, in a few hours, you will be dead or alive. If it is an ordinary person, under normal circumstances, there will be no major problems for a day or two . Subsequently, Li Ang took the cup from Shalulia Palace, put it on the table next to it, looked at the latter, and said with a smile, don't try to escape, you can't escape from my palm. Besides, if you are caught by me, you need to stay in that secret room for 3 days, 3 nights. I won't run away, I won't run away. Shalulia Palace regained some strength, and was frightened by Li Ang's words. She quickly shook her head and waved her hand, looking very frightened. Obviously, her experience of being trapped in a secret room had already left her with a psychological shadow. That would be the best. Li Ang laughed and gradually left the room. After Li Ang left, Shalulia Palace sat up, eyes full of fear, and looked around. In the house, there are windows, which are still open. If she wanted to escape, she could escape through the window. However, she is not stupid, she does not think that Li Ang will open a window and give her a direction to escape. There must be a conspiracy. Immediately, Shalulia Palace rejected her inner desire to escape. She was very vigilant and would never believe that she could escape so easily. And this open window, maybe it's a trap that Li Ang left her. After being detained in the secret room, she has become suspicious, and she is no longer the same as before. She can be defiant, and she doesn't take anything to heart at all. I don't want to be a slave, no. Shalulia Palace thought firmly in her heart, her delicate face became very tenacious. The other side. At the door of her room. In fact, Li Ang didn't go far. He leaned against the wall with his back to catch the other person's heart activity. He narrowed his eyes slightly and showed a smile. It's still not enough. If you want to completely tame her, it will take some time. Over time, it will come naturally. If you are too anxious, it will be counterproductive. The corners of Li Ang's mouth moved slightly, and he smiled lightly. Then, his figure disappeared in place. Under the domineering arrogance of his knowledge, every move of Shalulia Palace could not escape his observation. If the other party really wants to escape, he can guarantee that in 5 seconds, he will have the ability to recapture the other party. ... New world. The seawater fluttered in the wind, and the sun shone brightly with golden light. A pirate ship appeared here. On board. Kid, a red-haired, spiky-headed, face is full of embarrassment, and there is a hideous scar on his shoulder. In addition, the rest of the crew were also injured. Fuck. Kid gritted his teeth, raised his head, and shouted loudly, his tone full of anger. I don't understand, I was chased by the people of the Navy headquarters. Even after catching up to the new world, he was still persistent, which made him want to vomit blood. Isn't it the scene where the Tianlong people were beaten in the Chambord Islands? Could it be that this was captured by the people of the Navy headquarters so relentlessly? Kid, the Navy headquarters, and even the world government have already believed that the disappearance of the Tianlong people has something to do with us. Next, our actions need to be cautious. Kira was also injured, said solemnly. Who the hell kidnapped the Tianlong people? We didn't even touch the corners of the Tianlong people's clothes. If anyone were to say who it was, it would be the Straw Hat Boy. What's the matter with us? Kid felt aggrieved and gritted his teeth. They haven't met Tianlong people at all, so what about kidnapping? It's a pity that the Navy and the world government will believe the one-sided words of the pirates. Chapter 163 _ The Inexplicable Pirate Group, please customize it. It's a pity that the Navy and the world government will believe the one-sided words of the pirates. Naturally impossible. Therefore, the Navy keeps arresting them, and they certainly don't want to be easily caught. Whether they kidnap the Tianlong people or not, as pirates, once they are caught by the Navy, the consequences are self-evident. Therefore, even if they are obedient and caught by the Navy, the suspicion of kidnapping the Tianlong people can even be ruled out. Could it be that the Navy will let them go? This is simply impossible, even if they are not the real murderers who kidnapped the Tianlong people. Once they are caught, they can only be imprisoned to the end of the advancing city. Boss, you say, who kidnapped the Tianlong people? The rest of the crew asked in a low voice. The Straw Hats, or Rona's crew. Kid's eyelids jumped and he said bluntly. There is no need to think about it. Since it is certain that it is not the Tianlong people they kidnapped, the only remaining suspects are the Straw Hat Pirates and the Heart Pirates. Boss, the Navy is catching up with you. One of the captains shouted loudly. Come on. Kid's face changed, he gritted his teeth and shouted. ... Great Fairway. The members of the Heart Pirates have not yet stepped into the New World. In the past few days, Luo and the others have faced the arrest of no less than 10 warships, leaving them embattled and unable to escape. A deserted island. Luo and the others logged in quickly, and everyone had a lot of injuries on their bodies, making them look particularly embarrassed. Captain, we didn't kidnap the dragon people. The crew said with a sullen face. It must be Kid's gang, or the Straw Hat Gang. It's just that I don't know who it is. Anyway, it has nothing to do with us, and is just listed as the most likely suspect. Luo took a deep breath, calmed down, and thought. Exactly the same as Kid. Everyone is suspicious of each other. They completely failed to take into account that the three of them, in fact, had nothing to do with this kidnapping case. Only, for preconceived reasons. Coupled with the mobilization of the Navy, they completely believed that the other two were most likely to kidnap the Tianlong people. Damn, these guys kidnapped the dragons and put us into the water. One of the crew members was furious and slammed into the tree trunk next to him. The hardships they have endured these days are beyond words. Being constantly arrested by the Navy, there was no time to rest, and he continued to flee. The naval power of the Great Waterway is too large. Shall we go to the New World? Pander and Beppo suggested. The Chambord Islands are now heavily guarded, and we can't go to the New World. Luo shook his head and said in a heavy tone. After the kidnapping of the Tianlong people, the Chambord Islands have evolved into a battlefield, and battles may break out at any time. It is quite unwise to choose to go to the Chambord Islands at this time. It is equivalent to taking the initiative to deliver it to the door. When the Navy finds out, we will be able to go to the New World. During this time, we will silence our voices, do things more restrained, and don't be too public. Luo twisted his arm and said slowly. His eyes twinkled, and he kept thinking. Who the hell kidnapped the Tianlong people? Their Heart Pirates inexplicably took the blame for each other. Chapter 164 _ Pants are wet. Chambord Islands. In the past few days, the Navy has arrived one after another, and the entire island is heavily guarded. The original illegal zone was completely eliminated. All the navies are on standby, and everyone knows how serious the order to be executed this time is. The disappearance of the Tianlong people led to the fact that the navy stationed in the Chambord Islands in the past was judged to be unfavorable, and was directly shot. In this way, the new navy will be intimidated and go all out. No one wants to provoke those high-level personnel under such circumstances. Once you get into trouble, no one can save you. But what makes the residents here feel weird is that many pirates and evil forces in the Chambord Islands have been eliminated one by one. It's just that the extremely sinful population auction market has not been patronized by the Navy. It's been a few days, and I haven't heard any news that any population auction house has been taken away in one pot. This made some residents of July 43 inches have some guesses. Why isn't the Navy doing a population auction? They couldn't think of an answer to this. Is it because there is a crime scene and cannot be destroyed? It seems that only this explanation can convince them. And not far from the auction site, there is an ordinary house. Li Ang sat on the sofa with his back against the sofa, looking at the quiet picture of birds and flowers outside the window, and his mood became a little more pleasant and relaxed. Opposite the sofa, Shalulia Palace was sitting cautiously, with her head lowered, not daring to face Li Ang. Hiding the Zalulia Palace so close to the auction house, it can be seen that Li Ang's art master was bold and did not worry that the Navy would search it. Today's Navy, I'm afraid they will put all their energy on the three pirate groups. Naturally it is impossible to doubt Li Ang himself. It just so happens that Nami and Robin have gone to different places, and their safety is absolutely guaranteed. Li Ang thought so. It was precisely because the Straw Hats had dispersed, otherwise, he would have to worry about the two girls. Looking at it now, he doesn't need to worry about it at all. Robin followed the Revolutionary Army, absolutely safe. Even if the world government is dispatched, it can't help her. On the other hand, Nami went to the small sky island Visalia, which made it even safer. It is 100% impossible for the Navy on the surface to find her. The position she was in was above the sky, and it was a small moving island that could not be a target for the Navy. It is even more difficult to find a small empty island. Thinking of this, Li Ang breathed a sigh of relief, looked at the well-behaved Zaluria Palace in front of him, patted the seat next to him, and said, "Sit here." Yeah. Shalulia Palace lowered her head, her pretty face was a little crimson and embarrassed. As a proud Tianlong person, she actually behaved so humble, which made her a little ashamed. However, under the influence of others, under the shock of Li Ang's terrifying strength, she had to obey Li Ang's orders. If she resisted, she would have to enter the secret room and live alone for a few days. That kind of experience is definitely something she never wants to experience for the second time in her life. All I can feel is the infinite loneliness and darkness. A fragrant wind blows. Shalulia Palace sat beside Li Ang, straightened his back, looked at the side with his eyes, his breathing became a little messy, and his mood was tense. Her pure white hands rested on her thighs, and she was at a loss as to what to do with her restless hands. In the past, others would only show such nervousness when facing her. But now, facing Li Ang, she was not able to live up to her expectations. She felt a wave of fear and was extremely uneasy. Sudden. A hand was placed on her snow-white and delicate legs, making her face a little dull, the corners of her mouth moved slightly, she was speechless for a while, and her mood became more and more nervous. Chapter 164-Pants are wet. A hand was placed on her snow-white and delicate legs, making her face a little dull, the corners of her mouth moved slightly, she was speechless for a while, and her mood became more and more nervous. It feels good in the hand. Li Ang rubbed it hard and smiled. Cold to the touch, tender without a trace of impurities, soft as cotton. I have to say that the Zaluria Palace is quite well maintained. After all, Tianlong people, how many skin-care products do you want? Immediately, Shalulia Palace's pretty face turned red, her eyes dodged, she didn't dare to make a sound, and she didn't dare to stop Liang's actions. At the same time, she was in a chaotic mood and had no masters. Will he, do that to me? If so, am I going to resist? I am a dragon man. How dare he do that to me? However, he dared to do something to me, and he must have the courage to do other things. Me, what should I do? The flustered Zalulia Palace had already thought about the consequences, so that her tears were about to fall unconsciously. The arrogant Tianlongren Shalulia Palace, in these few days. She cried more times than in her entire life. She is defiant, and gradually becomes more and more appropriate to ordinary women. Soon. Liang's hand was very restless, sliding on Zalulia Palace's body. Through the clothes, he could feel the other party's proud figure and flawless skin. Huh. Shalulia Palace snorted. Her pretty face was like the sunset on the horizon, half of the sky was red. Even she herself was startled by herself, she actually had a feeling. Just now, she involuntarily called out. My goodness. Shalulia Palace covered her face, embarrassed, and wished she could find a crack to burrow in. It's just that the sense of contact from her body made her emotions gradually become strange. Even she herself couldn't explain this feeling, but it was something she had never felt before. Beside. The corners of Liang's mouth twitched slightly, leaning against Shalulia Palace's red ear, and said in a low voice, How do you feel? This breath blew, and Shalulia Palace's whole body became weak, and she slumped to the side. Her breathing became particularly messy, and her whole body was weak. See. Liang was even more restless, his hand penetrated the clothes and directly attached to the skin. This kind of contact made Shalulia Palace tremble all over, and the strangeness of her body became more intense. Her pretty face was blushing, her head was tilted, and she did not dare to look at Liang. Liang's unbridled hand almost swept it all over. Under his clutches, Shalulia Palace leaned on his shoulder unbearably, breathing disorderly, spit like blue, and her pretty face flushed. Finally. Liang pulled out his hands and showed a satisfied smile. 5.5 At this time, Shalulia Palace gradually recovered, her delicate face turned crimson, her eyes were blurred, and she fell into a state of confusion for a while. I'm going out, don't run around. Liang got up from the sofa, smelled the fragrance on his hand, and smiled. Yeah. Shalulia Palace nodded lightly and said. Immediately, Liang gradually left the house. After Liang left, Shalulia Palace blushed, stood up in a hurry, took a pair of straight long, snow-white legs, and ran to the bathroom. Looking down, her forehead was steaming, and her consciousness became blurred. Me. Her words trembled, unable to say a complete sentence. What she saw now, she couldn't believe it. The trousers in the area below her own feet. Actually, it's already wet. Chapter 165 Debt Collection. After leaving the house, Liang was walking on the street, pedestrians came and went, and he also saw many navies, who were guarding every corner neatly. Whenever there is trouble, it will attract a large number of naval siege. This time, the Chambord Islands have become a bit deserted. Liang's mouth moved slightly, and he said with some emotion. The more the navy, the less pirates. Although it is inevitable, there will still be many pirates. But none of them dared to walk on the streets at will, which presented a completely different picture from the previous Chambord Islands. In the past, in the Chambord Islands, pirates traveled everywhere, and it was difficult for the navy to see a few. But now it's the navy's turn to go everywhere, and pirates rarely appear here. The turmoil caused by the disappearance of the Tianlong people is obviously very huge. This time, I hope to drive away those worms on the island. But it's unlikely. This is the first passage to the New World. Even if the world government takes full care of it, it can't stop the pirates from landing. It's only been closely guarded for a while, and after a period of time, it will naturally gradually return to its previous state. Quote. Some were talking in low voices. Chambord Islands were so easily isolated, the world government would have taken action long ago. But it's obviously not realistic. It's impossible to keep pirates from going to the New World forever. Once the time is long, the pirates will also join forces against the navy of the Chambord Islands. It was only a while and a half, and it didn't show up. There were a lot of discussions in Li Ang's ears, most of which were speculations and discussions about the disappearance of the Tianlong people. However, no one would think of his head. The Straw Hat, Kid, and Heart pirates are talked about the most frequently. Soon, Li Ang arrived at Area 13. In the past, many pirates could still be seen laughing loudly here, but now, it seems very cold, there are very few people, and the navy rarely comes here. The impact is not small. Li Ang was a little emotional and smiled. However, the impact on him is negligible. No matter how much the Chambord Islands changed, it wouldn't affect him. Front. A tavern called Shachi's Rip-Off is very conspicuous. Li Ang moved in and walked in. As soon as I entered the pub, I saw an empty seat. There are only a few ordinary residents drinking here, but they are also unusually quiet. Guest, what do you need? At the front desk, a woman with short black hair wearing a spider pattern top, holding a cigarette in her right hand, looked at Li Ang calmly, took a breath of cigarette, and asked. She is the owner of this tavern, Shachi. She also has an extraordinary relationship with Rayleigh. Although she may be in her 60s, her figure is still very plump, and there is hardly any shrinkage. On the contrary, her figure is better than that of ordinary mature women. Just bring me a drink. Li Ang sat on the chair and said with a smile. Afterwards, Shachi randomly selected a few bottles of wine, mixed them together, took out the goblet, poured the wine into it, handed it to Li Ang, and said, "Please take it slow." Li Ang took the tall glass in his hand, looked at the red and translucent red wine, took a sip, and closed his eyes slightly. In the mouth, there is a little bitterness, but also a touch of sweetness, and the taste is unique. Swallowing down the throat, a burning sensation reverberated between the throats. Chapter 165-Debt Collection. Swallowing down the throat, a burning sensation reverberated between the throats. Not bad. Li Ang took a sip, put the wine glass on the table, and appreciated it. Immediately, he glanced at the scene and asked with a smile, "Is it always this quiet here?" Business has been terrible these days. Shachi took the cigarette, exhaled a puff of smoke, and shook her head. Dragon people. Li Ang's face changed and he smiled. Apart from this matter, what else can bring such a huge change to the Chambord Islands? With fewer pirates, naturally, there will be fewer people drinking. Shachi looked a little sad and said bluntly. But Li Ang didn't see any loss from her face. The pub is just her thing to pass the time. This is not her source of income, nor is it her only lifeline. In the second half of her life, Barry had no idea how much she had saved. Naturally, even if the tavern closed down, she could still have a good life. It's just that some of the fun is missing in life, that's all. I think you're here for something more than a simple purpose. Shachi looked at Li Ang with a bit of brilliance in her eyes, and said lightly, "I always feel as if I have seen you somewhere. The person who can make me remember is not a nobody. But I can be sure that it's the first time I've seen you myself. Other than that, I can only see your portrait from other sources." Shachi looked at Li Ang with a calm face and said. "Where's Rayleigh? I've come to him to collect the debt." Li Ang took a sip of red wine and said directly. He went fishing." Shachi waved her hand and said, "However, he actually owes someone else's berry, which surprises me. It stands to reason that he is someone who sells himself even if he drinks. How could he owe someone else?" "What about Barry?" "Then you'll have to ask him yourself." Li Ang smiled and said. "If that's the case, then tell me how much Barry he owes you. If the amount is not large, I can pay you back for him. If the amount is too large, I need to ask him face to face and get his approval." You shouldn't have an opinion on this, right? Shachi smiled at Liang 327 and said. Of course, this is your power, and I have no right to interfere. I am here to collect debts. As for how you discuss it, it has nothing to do with me. I just want to get my berry. Liang put down the wine glass, looked at Shachi, and said calmly. Then I want to ask, really, how much does he owe you berry? Shachi thought for a moment and asked. Not much. Corner of Liang's mouth twitched and replied, a total of 1.5 billion berry, no more or less. What did you say? Shachi's pupils shrank, her eyes twinkled a little, and said, Are you kidding me? I'm not kidding, you can ask Rayleigh himself. I'm sure he'll admit it, that's what he owes me berry. Liang said with a smile. 1.5 billion berries. Shachi's face gradually became heavy, and she looked at Liang with a gloomy face. She now seriously suspects that Liang is here to cause trouble. How could Rayleigh owe such a huge amount of berry? She couldn't even think of what Rayleigh owed berry for. Don't you think that I am so easy to be deceived? Young man, be careful. Shachi's eyelids jumped, revealing a meaningful sneer, said. Do you mean to deny it? Liang twisted his arm and said lightly. Chapter 166-Rayleigh, who is in a cold sweat, please customize it. Denial. You're picking on the matter. How could Rayleigh owe 1.5 billion berg? This is something that no normal person can owe. I advise you to lie, and you have to find some reliable reasons. Shachi folded her arms in front of her chest, her eyes a little less friendly. 1.5 billion berry. This is almost killing her. Although she is not unable to give it, she is still very heartbroken to give such a huge berry all of a sudden. What's more, she firmly believed that Rayleigh could not owe this huge amount of berry. Therefore, she can conclude that Liang wants to deceive her. Then you can tell me Rayleigh's address and let me find him, so that you can get his personal affirmation. How do you feel when you look at it this way? Liang's mouth moved slightly and said lightly. Do you want to run away? Shachi looked at Liang with a half smile, and said meaningfully. From her point of view, Liang's remarks were obviously to prepare for escaping from here. However, what puzzled her was how did Liang know that Rayleigh was here? It seems that the person in front of him has a somewhat difficult origin. But it was this that made her more suspicious of Liang's words. Perhaps, Liang came prepared. Escape. Why should I escape? Liang laughed and asked. Because, I have seen through your lies. If you continue to stay here, you may be killed by Rayleigh. It's better to find an excuse and leave this place of right and wrong. Shachi's reverie continued, and she already thought that what she had guessed was the truth. You are really cautious. The corners of Liang's mouth were slightly raised, revealing a smile, and said. In our line of business, we must be cautious. Shachi exhaled a puff of smoke, which gradually rose, revealing her confident face. Then just keep waiting here. When Rayleigh comes back, you will naturally know that everything you are guessing now is a joke. Liang laughed dumbly and said. He is now looking forward to how Shachi's expression will be when he learns that Rayleigh confessed. You are really bold, and I still have the urge to throw you out, so as not to pollute the environment here. I think you can't even give Barry this glass of wine. Shachi glanced at Liang expressionlessly and said. Throw me out. How dare you say that? Liang's eyes narrowed slightly, but he still suppressed the thought of doing something to Shachi. He was counting on Shachi to pay for Rayleigh. If Shachi was seriously injured, then it would become very complicated to collect the debt. Think of this. Liang calmed down and did not make any outrageous actions. What am I afraid to say? Do you think you are Kizaru? Or Carp? Shachi also showed a smile and said. Kazuna. Garp. Liang took a sip of red wine and said lightly, I'm not anyone, but the two of them, in front of me, didn't dare to speak like you. It can be seen that I didn't do anything to you, and I was already very kind. Then I have to thank you. Shachi couldn't help laughing, with a bit of interest on her face, and said, "You are really interesting. At the beginning, 1.5 billion berry, I already doubted you. Now it's better. These words of yours are not at all a true one. Cap didn't dare to speak like that in front of you. Do you really think that you are a great person? Although, I do feel that you are somewhat familiar. But, in this world, there are very few people who can stabilize carp. Even the 4 emperors can't do this. Do you think you can do it?" Shachi sneered again and again, and her expressions were very colorful. Chapter 166_Rayleigh, who was in a cold sweat, please customize it. Shachi sneered again and again, and her expressions were very colorful. Li Ang was already labeled a liar in her heart. "Forget it, I won't tell you more. When Rayleigh comes back, you will naturally understand how ridiculous your words are." Li Ang waved his hand and said slowly. "Then wait and see. I just hope that you won't be scared to pee your pants by then. 1.5 billion berry, such a huge number, you really dare to say it?" Shachi bartended very calmly and said, "You really don't know me." Li Ang took a sip of red wine and asked with a smile. It stands to reason that Shachi, who is well informed, should not know him. But what happened now made him have to wonder, is Shachi so well informed? "I don't know." Shachi shook her head directly, without any expression, said. Hearing this, Li Ang did not speak any more, drinking red wine alone, tasting the glass of wine carefully, and waiting for Rayleigh's return. As for the Zaluria palace in the house, he didn't have to worry about whether the other party would choose to flee, because he was fully prepared. Once Shalulia Palace chose to escape from the house, he would feel it for the first time, and then, with the fastest speed, he would bring the other party back and be imprisoned in the secret room for 3 days and 3 nights. After half an hour, Li Ang sat on the chair and stretched his waist. The people in the tavern are constantly changing, although there are few, but at least there are still customers to patronize. "Diaresis, if you're impatient, you can leave, and I won't pursue your previous outrageous behavior. Besides, I don't have time to talk to you here." Shachi looked at Li Ang and said lightly. "No need." Li Ang's mouth moved slightly and said. At this time, direction of the gate, an old man with silver hair came in gradually. He was wearing a pair of glasses, holding fish hooks and many other fishing tools. He stepped on a wooden sandal under his feet and was smiling. He, of course, is Hades Rayleigh. As soon as he walked in, Rayleigh opened his mouth and said, "Dahuan, today, I caught 12 fish, and today's dinner has ended. Shachi, help me prepare." At this time, Shachi walked out of the front desk and hurriedly came to Rayleigh's side, and said with a smile, "Rayleigh, someone has come to you." He said, "You owe him 1.5 billion berg, and you came here to collect the debt. The current liar really doesn't have a head." Zhao's Zhao. "When I first came here, I said you owed him 1.5 billion berry. How could I believe him? At first, I thought he would just leave, but I didn't expect that he would wait for you to come back. No, come and see with me, this little guy is quite interesting. I have to admit that he is not small and dares to wait for you to come back here." Quote. One after another, Shachi told what happened just now. In her eyes, it is funny and interesting. But listening to Rayleigh's ear, his expression changed dramatically. Rayleigh's pupils shrank, blocking Shachi's words, and hurriedly asked, "Have you done anything unusual to him? Did you provoke him? What's wrong?" Shachi frowned slightly and asked involuntarily. "Tell me now, did you provoke him?" Rayleigh was anxious, his spine was wet with cold sweat. He asked again. Chapter 167_Paralyzed Shachi. Well. Shachi frowned, and she finally noticed something was wrong. Rayleigh is so nervous. Could it be that the young man is really the creditor? And Rayleigh owes 1.5 billion berry, so panic. Thinking of this, Shachi questioned, "Rayleigh, you're actually recruiting, you really owe 1.5 billion berry?" "As far as I know, It's impossible for you to owe so many berry. What happened? It's hard to say anything. Rayleigh sighed and smiled bitterly. These remarks also thoroughly confirmed that he owed a high amount of berry. Hearing this, Shachi's lips moved slightly, and she was speechless for a while. She can't even understand, what is the situation, to owe such a high amount of berry. 1.5 billion berry. This is not 120 million, but a full 1.5 billion. The amount of this berry is higher than the bounty offered by those under the hands of the fourth emperor. That is to say, this bounty can even buy the heads of those cadres under the fourth emperor. Of course. It is one thing whether there is anyone to do it, but according to the reward list issued by the Navy headquarters, not many people can offer a reward of 1.5 billion berry. What exactly is the situation? Shachi took a deep breath and asked calmly. I think you must have heard about the things at the population auction site. Riley explained in a low voice, and he is the owner of the population auction house. At that time, a battle broke out in the auction house, many slaves escaped, and many measures were destroyed. What does this have to do with you? Shachi's brows deepened and she asked. Xiaoba's friend Kemi was auctioned off, and she was auctioned for 500 million bellies, plus some other damaged things. Together, it was worth 1.5 billion bellies. All, I will compensate. Rayleigh shook his head with a bitter face, and said. It just made him feel uneasy. The previous picture is unsightly. Why do you want to compensate? Also, is his auction house made of gold? Even if the huge auction house is destroyed, it cannot be worth the remaining billion bergs. Shachi's face was cold and she said bluntly. Having said that, one is willing to fight and the other is willing to suffer. I have no room for lowering the price he offered, do you understand? Riley smiled bitterly and said. Like, this pub of mine. Shachi's face froze, and she felt a touch of familiarity. Isn't that the case in her pub? Selling news, the price is up to her. If you can't afford the price, you can choose to leave. All in all, there is no room for bargaining. Ripping off, in the name of the tavern. And now, Rayleigh was actually ripped off by others, which made her not quite believe it herself. It can also be understood that way. Riley nodded and said. It's not in your style, Rayleigh. You just let him make an offer without any rebuttal. Shachi glared at Rayleigh angrily and asked. In her impression, even if Rayleigh did not refute, he would definitely not agree with the compensation. But what is the situation now? Rayleigh actually approved this compensation. Took a deep breath and said coldly, I'm going to have a theory with him now and try to lower the price as much as possible. 1.5 billion berry, why doesn't he grab it? Don't be impulsive. Rayleigh's pupils shrank, trying to stop it. But Shachi had already walked in front of Liang with a bad expression. Chapter 167_scared Shachi, please customize it. But Shachi had already walked in front of Liang with a bad expression. At this time, Liang saw Rayleigh beside Shachi, and then fixed his gaze on Shachi, and said with a smile, how about it, has Rayleigh told you about it? I didn't lie to you. It's not easy for you to be the owner of the auction house. However, 1.5 billion berry, isn't it too high? No matter how many slaves and measures are lost, it is impossible to have such a huge berry. Quote. Shachi looked at Liang with a serious face and said. She didn't dare to underestimate Liang, and being able to become the owner of the auction house also proved that Liang's identity was extraordinary. Moreover, she also learned some rumors. The population auction site has been maintained to this day and has not been eradicated by the Navy. It is because of some reasons that the Navy is afraid, so it has not started the population auction site. For this kind of existence, Shachi still looks for the mentality of not provoking. However, because the current amount of berry was too large, she had to bargain with the other party. A lot. How do I feel that the asking price is less? BHCJ. Liang held the wine glass in his hand, took a sip, and smiled lightly. Well. Shachi frowned, expressionless, and took a cigarette. The atmosphere has become depressing. Rayleigh stood aside, feeling a little vigilant to prevent Liang from attacking suddenly. Isn't your tavern the same as mine? I thought that everyone was traveling together and should be able to understand each other. But now it seems that you only agree with your own interests. Liang waved his hand and said slowly. 250 million berry, that's too much, anyway. Shachi didn't give in at all and said, if you think it's feasible, lower the price a little bit, and I'll pay you the full amount. But, 1.5 billion berry, I can't come up with it. Then how much do you think the compensation should be? Liang asked with a smile. The highest, 100 million berry, is already the highest amount I can compensate. Shachi thought for a while and said bluntly. 100 million bellies. You're really imaginative. Even that merman is more than that price. There are many freed slaves, and the environment has been destroyed. It can only be worth 100 million bellies. The corners of Liang's mouth twitched slightly, revealing a meaningful smile. Originally, these things of yours were not visible. Shachi said coldly. Liang's face was calm, he shook his head and said, it's not a matter of the invisible light, but Rayleigh has promised to pay me 1.5 billion berry before I let the mermaid and others leave. And now, you actually go back on your word, isn't it very kind? Riley couldn't help but speak and reminded, Shachi, don't be too impulsive. Don't worry about it. Shachi glanced at Rayleigh, then looked at Liang, and said, if you don't agree, then I can't do anything about it. This amount of ostentation can only be left to nothing. Can't get it. It's really nerve-wracking. Liang scratched his head, smiling unabated, looking at Rayleigh, and said, does she mean what you mean? If so, then I can only collect the bill myself. No no no. Rayleigh hurriedly shook his head and pulled Shachi aside. Rayleigh, what is it that worries you so much? Shachi's face was very puzzled. From the beginning, he wanted to ask questions, and said tentatively, is this person's background very big? But you and I don't need to be afraid of him. Well, do you know who he is? Rayleigh exhaled heavily and said. Who? Shachi was puzzled and asked, I always feel that he is very familiar, but I can't remember who he is. His name is Liang. Rayleigh raised his head, looked at the ceiling, and spit out a few words with difficulty. Immediately. Shachi was stunned. The name, like thunder, made her stunned. The cigarette in her hand fell to the ground along the trajectory. Various messages about Liang appeared in her head. Her eyes gradually enlarged, and her mood was difficult to calm down. Chapter 168 _ The terrifying Liang. Even, the fear in her heart was infinitely enlarged, making her legs a little weak. At any rate, she is also a big pirate who has roamed the sea, and has also collided with Garp. Although I don't know what the result will be, her strength is absolutely terrifying. Even so, after hearing Liang's name, she still felt heart palpitations. The old-fashioned big pirate, Liang who appeared in the new era, was so scared that his legs were weak. This picture is really unbelievable. There is no other reason. Shachi has learned more news than ordinary people. She is also more aware of the energy represented by the name Liang. This is a terrible existence that not even the world government dares to easily erect an enemy. It turned out that the population auction site was not swept up by the Navy because the owner there was Liang. Thought here. For a while, Shachi cleared up a lot of things she didn't understand. He's actually Liang. Shachi took a deep breath, tried her best to suppress the vibration in her heart, and muttered to herself. No wonder, even Rayleigh didn't dare to act rashly. It is for this reason that this young man is Liang. The name alone is enough to say a lot. At this time, Liang looked at the two of them and asked with a smile, how are you, two, have you discussed it? 1.5 billion burges, you can't be less. After all, to be a human being, you have to keep your word. I see. Shachi exhaled heavily, her face heavy and depressed, said. Now that she knows Liang's identity, how dare she bargain? Unless she doesn't want to die. Annoyed Liang, let alone Rayleigh, no one in the world can protect her. Even if Rayleigh and her are added together, they are not Liang's opponents, and they will be completely tortured and killed. The information she learned made it clearer that Liang's terrifying strength was far more terrifying than the rumors. At least, no one has seen Liang's bottom line. I'm just waiting here, don't waste too much time. 1.5 billion berry is not too much. For you, it shouldn't be an amount that you can't take out. Liang sat on the chair at the front desk and said with a smile. Shachi snorted and did not speak, her face was very gloomy. 1.5 billion berry, to her, is also an astronomical sum. Of course. 1.5 billion berry, she still took it out. Wait here. Shachi moved her feet and gradually left. See. Rayleigh showed an embarrassed smile, followed him up, and kept explaining. Shachi, this berry, even if I lent it to you. 1.5 billion berries, can you afford it? Shachi said angrily. This amount of berry is going to make her bleed. After saving for so many years, it was destroyed in one fell swoop. Repent. She didn't dare to go back on it, the person in front of her was Liang. The consequences of going back on it will be more serious, not something she and Rayleigh can bear. From what she knew, she even had a terrible guess. The disappearance of the Tianlong people may have something to do with Liang. But she didn't have any specific evidence. It was only her sixth sense that she could vaguely capture this guess. There was no evidence to show it. Even the Tianlong people dare to take them away, and they still care about the older generation of pirates. Chapter 168 _ The terrifying Liang, please customize it. Even the Tianlong people dare to take them away, and they still care about the older generation of pirates. When he first became famous, he escaped from the advanced city and was unscathed. At that time, Kizaru blocked it, but he was defeated, and he fled, and the Navy headquarters blocked the news. Then, thousands of pirates rushed to attack Liang. In the end, only 100 or so pirates escaped from the magic triangle, and the rest were all dead. At the same time, he didn't want to be manipulated. After all, he attacked the naval headquarters and killed the G4 branch. After a few days, he announced to everyone in the sea that 3 days later, he would attack the G3 branch. In the end, the two generals of the Dapo Navy, the hero Garp, the 4 from the Warring States period of the Buddha, one of the 7 Wuhei under the king, and the world's largest swordsman Mahak, were defeated. The yellow monkey was severely injured and sent for treatment that day. Quote. From now on, Navy headquarters, bow down to one person. Quote. Shachi recalled the information she had learned in her heart, and her heart kept rolling. This is the terrifying Liang, which makes people shudder. With this kind of record alone, all the enemies on the sea can be suppressed. Shachi was not blindly confident enough to think that she could shake such a terrifying figure. Now she, recalling Liang's words at that time, even she herself felt ridiculous for a while. Feelings have always been her singing a one-man show by herself. Liang didn't take her to heart at all, otherwise, I was afraid that she would have been killed in seconds. She is far inferior to Rayleigh, and she is not even Liang's enemy. Seeing the departure of Shachi and Rayleigh, Liang sat on the chair at the front desk, with a smile hanging from the corner of his mouth, and his eyes were meaningful. He also thought that Shachi would continue to bargain. Unexpectedly, the other party would leave so simply. 1.5 billion berry, that's it. The corners of Liang's mouth were slightly raised, and he smiled lightly. Holding a transparent goblet, drinking red wine and feeling the lingering taste in your mouth. Shachi finally recognized his identity. Otherwise, he didn't think that Shachi would be so simple and straightforward. If it wasn't for his name, Shachi had been intimidated. I'm afraid, the other party would have to entangle for a long time and would never give in. But as soon as Liang's name appeared, Shachi changed her words immediately, and she did not dare to entangle with Liang. There is only one reason. Liang's strength is far beyond Shachi's imagination, and it is not an opponent she can handle. Once the battle broke out, she even lost her life, so how could she care about these berries? Gradually, Liang's thoughts were gradually sorted out. He didn't feel anything about it, but all smart people would choose the same way as Shachi. It is quite unwise to provoke him hastily. Inside the pub, there was silence. Due to the arrival of the navy in the Chambord Islands, many pirates were driven away. As a result, the pub was deserted. Occasionally, I can see some local residents come here for a few drinks and chat or something. But the topics that everyone talks about revolve around the disappearance of the Tianlong people. Everyone is guessing, when will the Tianlong man be found? Moreover, has this heavenly dragon man been killed? While everyone was guessing, they were also very happy. Finally, there are some people who can cure the arrogant guys like Tianlong people. However, they can only hold these thoughts in their stomachs and dare not say them out. As the saying goes, disaster comes from the mouth. Although they were in a good mood, they still didn't dare to openly express their hearts. Once someone heard their opinions on the kidnapping of the Tianlong people, they would suffer. Chapter 169 _ Who kidnapped the Tianlong people? Be careful. Everyone was stunned and did not dare to talk too much. Especially now on the island, there are a large group of navies with many eyes and ears. Once they hear these things, they will become scapegoats, and it may not be impossible to be killed on the spot. The location of the front desk. Liang was drinking alone, and the voices of those discussions came from his ears. His face was calm and unmoved. Soon, Shachi and Rayleigh returned to the tavern, with Rayleigh carrying a wooden box in his hand. Aside, Shachi's face was gloomy and uncertain, looking very aggrieved. Boom! Rayleigh threw the wooden box on the ground and said helplessly, "Shachi, don't worry, I will give it back to you, I won't lie." "Stop talking nonsense." Shachi glanced at Rayleigh coldly and said. Immediately, she looked at Liang, pointed at the wooden box, and said, "These, 9 and 0, are all you need. If you don't believe it, you can check it yourself." "No need, I believe you." The corners of Liang's mouth were slightly raised, and he smiled lightly. "Huh." Shachi snorted coldly, and a deep pain could still be seen in her eyes. "The savings of most of my life, all of a sudden, disappeared more than half." This made her feel better. However, she did not object to Rayleigh's actions, she was just a little resentful. The ripping off business is really easy to do. You think, a pub that can take out so many Baileys is really envious of others. Liang got up from the chair, walked to the wooden box, and smiled. "Finally, it's not cheap, you guy." Shachi raised her brows and said coldly. "That's not a good word. There is a deal." Liang shook his head and said bluntly. "You are simply a robber." Shachi took a deep breath and said slowly. "As long as there are not too outrageous words, she can say it." "Heard." Liang still shook his head and smiled lightly. "You're wrong, I make more money than the robber." "Do you think, the robber, can I make 1.5 billion burges?" "They can't do it, but I can." "Go with your berry, you are not welcome here." Shachi waved her hand impatiently and said. "Don't be so ruthless, won't you give me a few glasses of wine?" Liang said with a smile. "Well." Shachi's eyes twinkled, and she had a plan in her heart. Looking at Liang, she said meaningfully, "Actually, it's not impossible. You and I have something that we can cooperate with." "Oh, is it? But it doesn't matter." Liang was a little surprised and smiled. "If you can tell me who kidnapped the celestial dragons, I will give you a lot of money." "What do you think? How?" The corners of Shachi's mouth moved slightly, her eyes fixed on Liang's body, and said. "Your question is really annoying. I don't know who kidnapped the Tianlong people. If I had known, I would have gone to the Navy to reveal the list." As far as I know, the Navy and the others have dispatched a high reward of 1 billion berries to find the traces of the Tianlong people. Anyone who provides information can get this berry. And how much berry can you give? Li Ang waved the wine glass in his hand and asked. You're quite well informed. Chapter 169 _ Who Kidnapped the Tianlong People. And GT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. And LT, 29 and GT. You're quite well informed. Eyelids twitched and she said, if you can really provide it, I can give you another 1.5 billion berry, maybe. But, are you really going to say it? Her words meant something. Li Ang could hear it, and he didn't need to use his knowledge to hear that Shachi had something to say. Just kidding, how could I possibly know who kidnapped the Tianlong people? This terrible feat, I want to know, who is so bold? Li Ang's face was calm and he smiled. Really don't know or fake don't know. Shachi's eyes narrowed slightly, and her eyes were fixed on Li Ang's body, as if she wanted to see through the other party. But Li Ang's whole person is like a mysterious fog that makes people unable to figure it out. It depends on what you think about it. Li Ang waved his hand and opened a gap in the wooden box. Into the eye, a piece of colorful jewelry, crystal clear. Immediately, he closed the wooden box and smiled even brighter, saying, it's really of good quality. I believe that the things here should be able to bless 1.5 billion berry. Won't you check it? Shachi felt aggrieved in her heart and said. I don't need it anymore. If there is less, I will come to you to collect the rest. If there is more, then I will spend it all on your behalf. Li Ang laughed and said. You bastard. Shachi raised her brows, her face unpleasant. Riley said quickly, okay, Mr. Li Ang, you can leave here after you take berry. We can't hold your big Buddha here. Since I'm not welcome, then I'll leave. If there is any cooperation or other business, you can contact me. I'll be happy to help you. Li Ang lifted the huge wooden box with his right hand and gradually walked towards the gate. Rayleigh and Shachi looked at Li Ang's back and gradually disappeared from sight. Finally send this monster away. Riley wiped the sweat from his forehead and smiled bitterly. Not to mention Shachi, even when he faced Li Ang, he felt a sense of oppression. I suspect that the disappearance of the Tianlong people has something to do with him. Shachi's face was solemn, and she slowly expressed her inner guess. Don't talk nonsense about these things. We can guess, but if you say it, it will cause a series of troubles. Rayleigh was not stupid, his face was calm, and he put the subject aside. Even if they really have the evidence that Li Ang kidnapped the Tianlong people, once they show it, they will have a deadly vengeance with Li Ang. Such consequences are worth the loss. Offending Li Ang for the sake of 1.5 billion berry is a huge loss. He is really powerful, and he can put the blame on other people for these things, so that he is not suspected of being a suspect. Shachi 2.0 sighed with admiration. He's not a fool. Rayleigh had a deep understanding of this, took a deep breath, and said, I don't know if it is a blessing or a curse for such a person to appear in the sea. However, if it comes to strength, I am afraid that no one can shake his position. Even if it's the fourth emperor, it won't work. Having said this, Rayleigh's expression became more and more serious. Yeah, those guys from the four emperors still have some distance to be comparable to Li Ang. Shachi nodded with a strange look in her eyes. The origin of such a terrifying figure suddenly appeared on the sea, no one knows. Even she didn't understand. What kind of identity did Li Ang exist in the sea before entering the advanced city? Why are you silent? All of this is a huge puzzle that no one can fully understand. Chapter 170 _ Someone is making trouble. Li Ang carried the wooden box and walked down the street. Pedestrians come and go, countless. 40% of the people are navy, the remaining 50% are residents, and 1% are pirates. Probably this ratio. The Chambord Islands are now surrounded by the navy. Walking in every corner, you will see some traces of the existence of the Navy, holding sophisticated equipment, always observing the passing of pedestrians on the street. Although they don't think that this way they can find the Tianlong people. But at least they are still doing their part, whether they find it or not, that's their part. In this case, if you are lazy, you will be in big trouble. Soon, Li Ang returned to the house, and the domineering feeling spread. As expected, Zaluria Palace is still in the house, and there is nowhere to run. She has been completely dominated by Li Ang, and the feeling of running away is gone. Crunch. Pushing open the door, Li Ang threw the wooden box aside. When you open it, you can see the colorful gems inside, illuminating the whole house. At this time, Shalulia Palace came out and glanced at the gems in the wooden box. Her expression remained unchanged, but looking at Li Ang's eyes, she was very cautious and lowered her head. She has seen many gems. Although there are many kinds of gemstones in this wooden box, they are beautiful and delicate. But in her eyes, it still seemed a little inferior. As a Tianlong person, she has seen thousands of gems, and she can't count the books. Naturally, she will not be surprised by this. You didn't escape, I thought you escaped. Li Ang closed the lid of the wooden box, looked at Zaluria Palace with a smile, and said, "Don't dare." Shalulia Palace lowered her head, her orange hair fell and covered her cheeks, she said timidly. The arrogant attitude originally belonging to the Tianlong people has long been unknown to which corner. Recalling the scene where Li Ang touched her entire body before, she felt shy in her heart, and had an inexplicable feeling for Li Ang. Boo boo. The phone bug dedicated to Li Ang rang. Li Ang walked to the sofa and sat down, picked up the phone bug, and asked, "Who?" "Sir, it's not good, the people from the Navy have surrounded our auction house." A voice full of anxiety. "Disco." Li Ang raised his brows and asked, "Long story short, there's no way the Navy would disturb the auction house, right? What happened to cause them to come to the auction house for inspection?" "Here, my lord, you should hurry up, they are already going to attack our auction house." Disco shouted with a worried look on his face. On the other end of the phone bug, the sound was messy. Finally, Li Ang hung up the phone bug with a puzzled look on his face. He couldn't think of who it was, knowing that he was the person in charge of the auction house, and would dispatch the Navy to attack the auction house. "Don't run around, I'll go out." Li Ang stood up from the sofa, looked at the Shalulia Palace beside him, and smiled lightly. "Yeah." Shalulia Palace nodded lightly, daring not to have any disobedience. Immediately, Li Ang walked to the other party's side, felt the familiar touch, and approached the other party's cheek, looking at the white as jade skin up close. The breath slapped on Shalulia Palace's face, making her pretty face turn crimson, her eyes dodging, but she didn't resist. "Wait for me to come back." Li Ang showed a smile and gently touched the other party's fragrance. Sweet, with an aroma. With a swish, Shalulia Palace's pretty face turned red, as if half of the sky was blushing. It was indescribable how charming she was at the moment. Chapter 170 _ Someone is making trouble. NLT, 31 and GT. With a swish, Shalulia Palace's pretty face turned red, as if half of the sky was blushing. It was indescribable how charming she was at the moment. After Li Ang left, Shalulia Palace sorted out the messy clothes, calmed down, and looked at Li Ang's back with some blurred eyes. His first refusal was handed over to Li Ang. However, instead of having any regrets, she felt a little happy. So embarrassing. Do I like him? Impossible, I am a Tianlong. Shalulia Palace kept shaking her head, took a deep breath, calmed her inner mood fluctuations, tidied up her messy hair, looked at her proud figure, and showed a smile. Such a good figure was actually seen and touched by him. Shalulia Palace's pretty face blushed, and she was a little embarrassed. Thinking of this, she hurriedly glanced at the middle of her feet, and suddenly heaved a sigh of relief, and patted Yu Hung in the chest. Fortunately, This time it wasn't as embarrassing as before. However, just a little. It was almost as if he was embarrassed again. Suddenly, she hurriedly ran into her room to calm down. Area 1, Population Auction. A group of navy surrounded this place. Inside the auction, Disco looked at St. Charles Rose, the heavenly dragon man in front of him, and smiled anxiously. Sir, are you going to stop me from destroying this place? Charles Rose raised his brows, his face full of anger, and said coldly. He went back and forth. Under the words of his father, he immediately arrived at the Chambord Islands, and returned to the auction house that made him feel ashamed. His purpose is quite obvious, he is going to destroy this place. His shame is recorded here, as well as the shame of the Tianlong people. Everything starts from here. If this place is destroyed, everything will not spread. Therefore, he must destroy this place and let the shame of the Tianlong people disappear from this world. This matter not only affected him, but also the authority of the Tianlong people. Don't dare, don't dare. Disco quickly shook his head, lowered his head, and said. He was anxious for a while. How could he not be nervous when the Tianlong people were in front of him? If the Tianlong people must destroy this place, he has no way of 797 at all. Right now, he can only hope that Lord Liang can quickly arrive here and deal with these troublesome things. Who can negotiate with the Draco? This person, only Liang has this qualification. Even the Tianlong people had to stand guard when facing Liang, not daring to act rashly. You know, this is a fierce man against the naval headquarters alone. In the eyes of Tianlong people, this kind of terrifying existence is also quite energetic. If you don't dare, then go away and don't stop me. Today, I must destroy this place. No one can stop my intentions. If you don't want to die, go away from me immediately. St. Charles Rose said coldly with a bad face. Beside him, a group of men in black stood to ensure his personal safety. But the strength of these people, most of them are not as good as the pirates with a bounty of hundreds of millions. If they are used to protect their own life safety, it still seems a bit reluctant. Sir, please wait a second. Disco gritted his teeth, took a deep breath, and said. No matter what, he insisted on waiting until Liang arrived. Otherwise, the auction house will be destroyed. But right now, St. Charles Rose is impatient, and it is very likely that he will be shot directly by the other party's order. Risking his life, he still insisted on blocking, living up to his status as a high-level person in the auction house. And LT, 32 and GT. Chapter 171-Instant Kill. Outside the auction. A group of navies stood guard, armed with guns, and surrounded the auction house. Are we really going to do something to the auction house? The people above said that the owner of the auction house is too big, so we can't act rashly. But now, under the orders of the Tianlong people, you and I can't resist. If we disobey the orders of the Tianlong people, will there be good fruits to eat? It doesn't matter, even if the owner of this auction house has a great background, can it be that he can be bigger than the Tianlong people? That's right, brothers, we don't have to worry at all. Quote. A group of navy talked in whispers. As long as the order of St. Charles Ross, they will immediately raise the auction floor to the ground. At this time, not far away, Liang's figure appeared, and he walked to the auction site step by step, his face calm. A group of 987 troops appeared in his sight. It's really a big battle. Liang's mouth moved slightly, his expression inexplicable. He was a little confused. The Navy should know that he is the master here, but why do you want to do it? The reason is somewhat intriguing. Tatata. He didn't make any stops and walked towards the auction house ahead. Far away, Liang's figure became the target of public criticism and was discovered by a group of navies ahead. The Navy immediately issued a warning. People in front, stop your actions and leave here immediately. This place is surrounded by our Navy. If you don't want to be accidentally injured, leave this place as soon as possible. How bold. Is it an order from the Warring States period? Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly, thinking so in his heart. This possibility is directly ruled out. The Warring States did not have this courage. World government. It seems that if the world government wanted to do something, it would have already declared war on him. But the world government has not acted for a long time, which can prove that even the world government will not easily choose to fight against Li Ang. So, who called for a group of navies to surround the auction house? Dragon people. Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly, and he had an answer in his heart. Apart from the Tianlong people, he couldn't think of any other answer at all. Neither the world government nor the navy would do these things. Only the Tianlong people would make these actions unscrupulously. Because they don't even know how terrifying Li Ang is. Stop. A group of navy pointed guns at Li Ang, frowned and shouted. Noisy. Li Ang's face was calm, and he glanced at the group of navy in front of him. Visually, the number of the navy was about 20,000 people. Each of them was armed with sophisticated guns and stared at Li Ang with anger. More than 20,000 navies were dispatched. It can be seen that they are definitely waiting for this matter. If we don't stop, we're going to shoot. A navy looked at Li Ang coldly and said. However, Li Ang's face was calm and unmoved, and he still rushed to the auction ahead as always. Immediately, the navy became angry and shouted, shoot. Countless guns were triggered. Boom, boom, boom. A burst of gunfire rang out, and the bullet pierced the air and attacked Li Ang's position. Overwhelming bullets, no escape. Armed color. The corners of Li Ang's mouth moved slightly, and a layer of black armor covered his entire body. Boom, boom. Chapter 171-instant kill. And LT, 33 and GT. Boom, boom. The bullet hit the armed arrogance on his surface, and there were bursts of crisp sounds, but it didn't bring any pain, and it wasn't even worth it to tickle him. The bullet fell to the ground. The scene of tens of thousands of bullets all falling to the ground is terrifying. How is this possible? Numerous navies were shocked, their lips trembling. They looked at the picture in front of them, their whole body stiffened. Incredible. The bullet couldn't penetrate the opponent's body. Shoot him and kill him. If he's bad for the Draconians, then we're in trouble. Shoot, buddies, and never let him near the auction. Shoot and kill him. Numerous navies were anxious and pulled the trigger. A hail of bullets shrouded Li Ang's body. However, none of the bullets could penetrate his armament, all of which were blocked when they touched the surface, fell to the ground, and no longer had any threatening power. Too weak. Li Ang's face was calm, and he shook his head. The lethality of these bullets is still too weak, relying on such power to kill him. This is simply a big joke. He is a monster. Some navies were panicked, and the fear in their hearts was infinitely magnified. Even bullets can't penetrate Li Ang, how can they compete? Thinking of this, they didn't throw away their weapons and fled this place of right and wrong far away. However, there is a Tianlong person behind them. If they escape, even if they can escape the palm of the enemy, the world government will shoot them. They have no escape. It's my turn. Li Ang didn't stop, standing less than 10 meters in front of the navy, the corners of his mouth curved slightly. An aura arises spontaneously. Overlord is domineering. Buzz. A terrifying aura filled the air, and the Overlord was domineering. With Li Ang as the center point, it spread around. Within a radius of 100 meters, everyone was enveloped by his domineering arrogance. Ah! A navy's eyes turned white, he lost consciousness, his hands became weak, and the gun fell to the ground with a crisp sound. I saw that he fell to the side and completely lost his combat effectiveness. Thump, thump. One by one the navy fell to the ground, and under the shock of this terrifying overlord, no one could maintain a standing posture. Even the lieutenant colonel, or even the colonel, could not support it. There are more than 20,000 navies in the audience, without any exception. Under the shock of Li Ang's domineering arrogance, everyone fainted and became unconscious. Immediately, Li Ang withdrew his armed arrogance, his face was calm, and he crossed the fainting navy under his feet and walked to the auction ground in front step by step. 2.2 behind him. The scene was terrifying. Tens of thousands of navy, all fell to the ground. This scene is simply chilling, and the spine is wet with cold sweat. None of the navies remained conscious, all lost consciousness. It's like a corpse, all of which are navy. Tens of thousands of people fell to the ground. How terrible this scene is. From not far away, some residents came. When they saw this picture, they were all shocked, dumbfounded, unable to speak. Navy, is the whole army wiped out? Oh my God. I just heard the sound of gunshots just now, and after a while, tens of thousands of people were killed in seconds. Who actually did this? It always feels like something big is going to happen. Thousands of navy, if you say you're down, you're down. Quote. NLT, 34 and GT. Chapter 172 sorry, you can really do whatever you want, please customize it. Inside the auction. Are you going to stop me? Charles Rose's eyes were not good, he stared at the disco, and said lightly. Hearing this, Disco's face was full of tension, cold sweat dripped from his forehead, and he hurriedly said, Sir, it's not that I want to stop you. Instead, just wait a moment. What are you waiting for? Do you think there is someone in this world who can disobey my orders? Even if you do wait for someone to come, he can still break through the defense line of tens of thousands of navies and come to the auction. St. Charles Ross looked extremely arrogant, and the majesty of the dragon man exuded. A few men in black beside him surrounded the disco and were about to start. Disco will be killed on the spot as long as Charles Ross gives the order. Sir. Disco panicked, gritted his teeth, and still did not flinch. No matter how scared he was, he still insisted on his inner thoughts. He believed that Li Ang would definitely come back. Okay, very good. St. Charles smirked in anger, and coldly instructed the men in black, kill him for me, and the pariahs here. Anyone who stops them will be killed without mercy. 17 inches yes, my lord. Several men in black nodded quickly and escaped with a pistol. The pistol was raised slowly, pointing at the disco. It can be clearly seen that Disco's expression is extremely terrified, his lips are trembling, and his eyes are full of fear, which cannot be concealed. His legs were weak, and he almost collapsed on the ground in fright. Today, no one can stop my determination to destroy this place. I don't care whose chassis is here, in short, this place must be destroyed. St. Charles Ross looked arrogant and domineering, with a look of anger on his face, said. This is the most humiliating place in his life. He was actually beaten by a pariah. How could he endure this? Absolutely unforgivable. And the auction house was the place where he recorded the shame he had suffered. Naturally, if the auction house continued to exist in this world, he would not be able to raise his head in the eyes of many of the Tianlong people. Therefore, in order to avoid this situation, he returned to the Chambord Islands alone again, and ordered tens of thousands of navies to surround the auction house, ready to destroy this place of right and wrong at any time. Just when the words of St. Charles Rose fell, Disco's expression was also extremely frightened. The man in black was holding a gunman, waiting for the order of St. Charles Rose. Just pull the trigger lightly and the disco will die on the spot. Kill him for me. St. Charles Rose's face was calm, and he said lightly. The man in black is ready to pull the trigger. Disco's pupils shrank and enlarged infinitely, and he felt the breath of imminent death permeating, as if he smelled the moment of his own death. Sudden. An aura swept the audience. Buzz. A terrifying aura enveloped the group of men in black. Their eyes turned white, and they fell to the ground instantly, unconscious. Even the hand holding the pistol was released, the pistol fell to the ground, and there was a crisp sound. Thump, thump. The men in black fell to the ground. This scene made St. Charles stunned, sniffing his nose, his expression sluggish. Well. Chapter 172 _ you can really do whatever you want, please customize it. NLT, 35 and GT. Well. Disco's eyes flickered, looking at the man in black who fell next to him. He breathed a sigh of relief. Fine. Almost, he will die at the hands of these people. But these people suddenly fainted. Who did it? Thinking of this, Disco already had the answer in his heart. Looking at the front, sure enough, a figure appeared. Lord Li Ang. Disco's expression was full of excitement, and lost his voice. Surviving in a desperate situation made his admiration for Li Ang grow even more. At this moment, St. Charles Rose frowned, turned his head, looked at Li Ang who was walking step by step, and shouted angrily, "Who are you? How dare you destroy my affairs? You really don't know who I am." Li Ang walked out step by step from the dim environment and appeared in front of St. Charles. The original dim environment made it impossible for Charles Rose to distinguish Li Ang's face. But now he can clearly see it. After seeing Li Ang's face, St. Charles Rose's expression changed slightly, and he asked coldly, "Li Ang, who gave you the courage to attack my subordinates? Do you know how much sin you committed?" Li Ang's name has been heard all over the country. Even Tianlong people have heard a little about it. While despising the incompetence of the Navy headquarters, they also had some sense of awe for Li Ang. Not everyone can compete with the Navy headquarters on their own. However, Li Ang did it. All of this was only because of Li Ang's terrifying strength, not because the naval headquarters was too weak. If the Navy headquarters is weak, Li Ang is not the only one who makes these moves. All kinds of achievements show that Li Ang in front of him is by no means an ordinary person. Even if he is a Tianlong person, he has to be treated with caution. Then may I ask Mr. Charles St. Rose, who gave you the guts to point a gun at my men? Do you know what a terrible crisis this will bring to you? The corners of Li Ang's mouth twitched slightly and smiled faintly. Immediately, Disco almost burst into tears. And being able to become Li Ang's subordinate is simply a blessing that he has cultivated in his 800 lifetimes. No one would protect their subordinates like this, especially in front of the Tianlong people. But Li Ang did it, and he talked normally in front of the 470 Tianlong people without hesitation. It can be seen that Li Ang is not afraid of the so-called Tianlong people at all. Lord Li Ang, you are really my idol. Disco's lips trembled, the same thought in his heart. He looked at Li Ang's figure in front of him. The figure of the other party seemed to be taller and more stalwart, which made him feel a strong sense of self-pity. The long gap between the two cannot be bridged. The difference between a sky and an earth. Being able to follow such a terrifying big man, Disco was very excited, exhaled heavily, and the pressure in his heart gradually dissipated. With Li Ang appearing, there would be nothing to him. Even Tianlong people may not let Li Ang give in. Li Ang, do you think you have the strength to do whatever you want? St. Charles Rose narrowed his eyes slightly, flashing cold light, and shouted angrily, "Do you know that there are too many people in this world who can kill you? There are even too many ways to kill you. You are dead. If you anger me, even if you have the ability to reach the sky, you will have to be killed. I advise you, don't provoke me, I am in a very bad mood now." "I'm sorry." Li Ang waved his hand, walked in front of St. Charles Rose, looked at the angry expression of the other party, and said with a smile, "People with strength can really do whatever they want." NLT, 36 and GT. Chapter 173 _ Beat the Tianlong people. You. St. Charles Rose stared at him with anger on his face, pointed at Li Ang, held a gun at Li Ang's forehead, and said coldly, "You damn pariah, no matter what, pariahs are pariahs. You've got to think about it. Point a gun at me, it's going to kill you." Li Ang's mouth moved slightly, his face was calm, and he said lightly, "I'm a dragon man." Charles Rose raised his head and shouted with pride and pride. Heard. Li Ang shook his head and said, there is no rule that you can't kill Tianlong people. If you have enough strength, even the world government can be overthrown. At that time, Tianlong people are not as good as pigs and dogs. You're a pervert, you bloody bastard. Charles Rose's face changed greatly and he pulled the trigger. Boom. The bullet cut through the air and attacked Li Ang's forehead. Lord Li Ang. Disco was terrified and couldn't help reminding. At this time, Li Ang stretched out his hand slowly, and with 2 fingers, he caught the bullet with ease. With a little force, the steel-hard bullet gradually became twisted in his hand, crumpled into a black spot the size of a fingernail, and threw it aside. With a weapon like a bullet, it's still too whimsical to deal with Li Ang. How dare you shoot? Li Ang's eyes flickered, and he said meaningfully. You dare to touch me? St. Charles took a half step back, but he still strengthened his courage, gritted his teeth, and said angrily. Although he couldn't help Li Ang, he didn't think that Li Ang would do anything to him. You know, he is a heavenly dragon. The superiority of the Tianlong people made him think that no one in this world would dare to shoot him. Of course. Aside from being punched by Straw Hat Luffy before, this is an exception. Where do you get the sense of superiority that I dare not do anything to you? Li Ang shook his head and smiled lightly, looking at the fat pig face of St. Charles Rose, and said. Disco was a little worried and said, Lord Li Ang diaresis. I'll take care of it. Li Ang glanced at the Disco and said bluntly. Yes, my lord. Disco did not dare to speak rashly, nodded, and led the remaining few younger brothers to gradually walk to the side, quietly watching the situation on the scene. They expressed deep admiration for Li Ang's actions. You know, this is a Tianlong person. However, not only did Li Ang not have any fear, on the contrary, he still wanted to do something to the Tianlong people. Such a feat has already surpassed many big pirates. Almost 99% of people in this world dare not do what Li Ang did. However, there are also some stunned young people who were reckless. Obviously, Luffy is the group of people who were reckless. If it wasn't for the last Bartholomew to appear, they would have been wiped out. And Li Ang is the kind of person who knows the consequences, but dares to bear the consequences. Death to me. Charles Rose Saint pulled the trigger, the bullet cut through the air, and swiftly attacked away. Li Ang easily avoided the bullet and approached the position of St. Charles in front of him step by step. His smile was meaningful and extremely strange. At this time, St. Charles Rose's expression changed a bit, and he shouted, Stop, don't come here. Still too stupid. Li Ang's mouth moved slightly and said lightly. Chapter 173 played Tianlongren. NLT, 37 and GT. Li Ang's mouth moved slightly and said lightly. His footsteps did not stop, he walked all the way to St. Charles Rose, slowly raised his right hand, and slapped it out. Snapped. St. Charles Rose was incited by the giant force, and was thrown into the air. His teeth were broken several times, he vomited blood, flew a few meters away, and fell on the chair. Boom. The wooden chairs were all smashed, and there was a sound, and billows of smoke were raised, filling the surroundings. Cough cough. St. Charles Rose stood up with difficulty, his eyes widened, his face full of disbelief. He touched his left cheek, which was already red and swollen, making his expression even more hideous. You, how dare you attack me? Charles Rose stared at Li Ang with blood, and screamed. He recklessly rushed towards Li Ang's position in front of him. At the same time, Li Ang raised his right foot and kicked out. Boom. Charles Rose Saint once again experienced the feeling of flying. He flew several meters in the air, collided with the wall, and the pain in his whole body was unbearable. Pain covered his body, and he almost doubted his identity. He is a dragon man. Actually, being hanged and beaten like this. Aside. Disco and several of his subordinates paused in their hearts and did not dare to say a word. They looked into Li Ang's eyes with deep respect and admiration. Tianlong people do not give face, only Li Ang dares to do so. If it was them, even if they had the strength to deal with St. Charles, they would not dare to act rashly. Charles Rose himself is very weak, but the background behind him is terrible, and behind him stands the entire world government. Once attacked, the world government will dispatch CP0 or Admiral to attack the enemy. Li Ang looked at St. Charles, who was on the verge of being beaten, shook his head, and said bluntly, "It's too weak. In front of me, a person of your strength, I can turn around and kill thousands of people." You. St. Charles Rose was holding the wall with difficulty, standing half-standing, his eyes bloodshot. His red and swollen left face, coupled with the various parts of his body, had been hit so hard that he could not move. Several bones in the body were broken. This was something he never imagined. Li Ang actually dared to do it, and as soon as he made a move, he was ruthless, and did not treat him as a Tianlong person at all. To be honest, in fact, if Li Ang really wanted to be serious, Charles Rose would have blown his head when he slapped him. But in order to avoid the follow-up situation, Li Ang still somewhat restrained. That is to say, he is now severely hurting St. Charles, which is already a very light punishment for the other party. If it wasn't for not wanting to be so troublesome and attracting many people from the world government, Li Ang would have killed Charles Rose, Zhao Li's, long ago and would not have kept the other party for so long. At present, Li Ang has already controlled a Tianlong person, and his primary goal is to tame that Tianlong person. As for the other Tianlong people, it is not his goal. If you attract people from the world government, it is easy to find clues. Then his plan to tame the Tianlong people will be in vain. In order to kill a mere idiot like St. Charles Rose, and to expose the celestial dragon from Zalulia Palace, relatively speaking, Li Ang thought it was his own loss. "Don't act rashly, I will really kill you." Li Ang walked to St. Charles Rose and smiled faintly. Under his gaze, Charles Rose's eyes were a little frightened. Tianlong people are all scumbags. Before he was beaten, he threatened to be number one in the world, defying no one, and everyone had to circle around him. But after being beaten, the fear in my heart will magnify infinitely. Chapter 174 Throw him out. Under the domination of fear, the majesty and dignity of Tianlong people have been left behind by St. Charles, and only survival is the most important thing. He is more afraid of death than ordinary people. How could he allow himself to die here before he had finished enjoying that great day? Originally, I thought that Li Ang would not do it, so he could be arrogant to the end. But who knows, Li Ang not only didn't keep his hand, but directly broke his ribs with one kick, making him standing now as a problem. In this way, the fear is infinitely magnified. That so-called self-confidence collapsed. Li Ang in front of him would really kill himself. Think of this. Charles Rose was immediately panicked, took a deep breath, stared at Li Ang, and said, "What do you want to do? If you kill me, you will be in too much trouble." "I don't kill you, I beat you to a crippled state. Isn't it considered that I didn't kill you?" The corners of Li Ang's mouth were slightly raised, and he smiled lightly. If you do this, you will offend the world government to death. You will endure the endless pursuit and killing. I advise you, don't do anything." St. Charles gritted his teeth and said with difficulty. It's hard to believe that he could actually say these words. For a while, Li Ang's impression of him has changed. I thought that the other party was just a stupid waste. But in the face of this desperate situation, Charles Rose Saint still has a lot of brains, and did not choose to provoke Li Ang again to prevent him from doing it again. 310. You still have some brains. With a smile on Li Ang's face, he said, "But, if I just let you go like this, wouldn't I be embarrassed? What about the Tianlong people? What do you want?" Charles Ross sucked in his nose, blood dripping from the corners of his mouth, and the pain caused cold sweat to flow from his forehead constantly, and his ribs were broken. Compensation. Li Ang glanced at the destroyed chair at the scene and said bluntly. I'll give you 500 million berry. St. Charles Rose's eyes were gloomy and he gritted his teeth. 500 million berry. The disco on the side was startled and took a deep breath. I've heard of Tianlong people being so proud, but I didn't expect them to be so proud. Hundreds of millions of berries are often used to talk about things, and they really don't think of Bailey as Bailey. This is also a reasonable thing. Berry, for the Draconians, is within easy reach. Even if they don't have to work, every year there will be gold tribute from various kingdoms in the sky, which is equivalent to berry all over the world, and there are channels to circulate to the hands of Tianlong people. They are spending the whole world's berry. How can it be spent? Simply endless. 500 million berry. That's BHDA. Li Ang's mouth moved slightly, a little surprised, and smiled. St. Charles Rose, who was tortured by his injuries, hurriedly said, I will compensate 500 million berry. Now, let me go. Killing me will not benefit you or me. Indeed, killing you won't do me any good, but it will bring a lot of trouble. However, if I don't kill you, I seem to have a lot of trouble too. Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly and said meaningfully. Well. Charles Rose's pupils shrank, his eyes rolled, and he said, You want to kill me? No, 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 on the contrary, I will let you go. Remember, give me your 500 million bellies as they are. If you don't take it, then I will go to Mary Joa in person. Found you. But if that time comes, I won't just ask for 500 million berg compensation. Li Ang stood in front of St. Charles Rose and said directly. I will definitely bring it, don't worry. St. Charles clenched his teeth and said solemnly. Li Ang knew what he was thinking. It was nothing more than thinking about how to retaliate against Li Ang if he escaped from here. If he really wants to take revenge, Li Ang will not have any timidity. Chapter 174 Throw him out, please customize it. And LT, 39 and GT. If he really wants to take revenge, Li Ang will not have any timidity. Come to think of it, just come. Next time, he will really let St. Charles Rose understand how serious the consequences of provoking him are. Disco. Li Ang glanced at the disco and ordered, Throw him out to me, don't let him pollute the air quality of the entire auction hall. You. Charles Rose spit out a mouthful of old blood, his face full of anger, and he glared at Li Ang. But in this case, he didn't dare to act rashly, so he could only secretly hate it. Thinking about it, he must find an opportunity to retaliate against Li Ang. Wait, after I leave, I want you to understand what it means to be unhappy. You dare to do something to me, and you will never forgive me. My handsome face has been beaten so ugly. I will never allow such a person to exist in this world. He must die. Quote. St. Charles Ross kept thinking in his heart, and was extremely angry. Anger attacked his heart, causing him to vomit blood again. Sir. Disco walked up to St. Charles with some schadenfreude in his heart, supported the other party and lowered his head, so that the other party could not capture the fluctuations in his expression. Help me out. Charles Rose Saint glanced at Li Ang for the last time, and the mood swings in his eyes were very obvious. This shows that he will definitely come back for revenge. As for whether the world government will give him the power to retaliate, it is unknown. A seriously injured Tianlong person has a much lower impact than a dead Tianlong person. Therefore, it is very unwise to provoke Li Ang for a seriously injured Tianlong person. What's more, even if the world government really wants to dispatch people to deal with Li Ang, how many people can they dispatch? Could it be that the Navy headquarters really came out to destroy Li Ang? This is simply not realistic. Just to kill Li Ang and leave the naval headquarters unguarded. At that time, when the Revolutionary Army is dispatched, I am afraid that the naval headquarters will be razed to the ground in an instant. You must know that the biggest enemy of the world government has always been the Revolutionary Army. Ripping off the face with Li Ang will not do them any good. If it is urgent and Li Ang joins the revolutionary army, the threat to their world government will be even greater. Disco, you misunderstood me. Li Ang's face was calm, and he said lightly. Sir. Disco turned around, puzzled. I said, throw him out. The corners of Li Ang's mouth moved slightly, without any emotional fluctuations. For a moment, Disco was stunned. Even the party involved, Charles Rose, was stunned. He wondered if he had heard it wrong. Throw him out. This is so deceiving. Li Ang, you bloody bastard. St. Charles Rose shouted with anger on his face. Are you following my orders or his? Li Ang looked at the Disco and said. My lord, I see. Disco took a deep breath, tried his best to calm down his inner tension, and nodded. Do you dare? St. Charles Rose's face changed dramatically, and he shouted. Immediately. Disco ignored his struggles, grabbed St. Charles and lifted it up with both hands, gradually walked out of the auction, and threw it into the open space in front of him, as if he was throwing a bag of garbage. Chapter 175-Unlucky St. Charles Rose. Boom. St. Charles Rose was thrown on the ground, feeling the hard floor of the ground, colliding with his body, bringing a sore feeling, which made him take a deep breath. You guys. Charles Ross, ignoring the pain in his body, stared at the auction hall in front of him, gritted his teeth, and shouted with anger, I will definitely come back to you. Disco shivered and was a little nervous, but recalling Li Ang's words, the confidence in his heart gradually emerged. Without looking back, he re-entered the auction house. Of Disco, St. Charles Rose was so angry that his eyes were about to burst into flames, staring at the auction store. Unforgivable, unforgivable. This auction house, I must destroy him. Where did that group of trash navies go? Why didn't they stop him? Damn it. St. Charles Rose put all his grievances on the navy and roared. In the huge air, only his loud voice remained. He stood up with difficulty, with large and small bruises and scars on his body, and several broken ribs, making it difficult for him to walk. After turning around, his expression froze. What I see now is a group of fallen navy. Tens of thousands of navies all fell to the ground, and even St. Charles of Rose felt a burst of heart palpitations and numbness on his scalp. These people are not dead, but they fainted. At the same time, everyone fainted. It was unbelievable. What's the situation? St. Charles Rose's throat was dry, and he spoke with difficulty. He walked to the side of a navy, kicked hard, and shouted, Get up. Well. The navy opened his eyes in confusion, and after seeing St. Charles, his whole body quivered, and he quickly greeted, Sir St. Charles. What the hell is going on here? St. Charles Rose asked with blue veins on his forehead. We saw an enemy, and then we started an indiscriminate attack on him. But the scary thing was that he was completely unafraid of bullets. In the end, we were shocked by a terrible momentum and passed out directly. The navy explained, and the more he spoke, the more frightened his expression became. Recalling the momentum that enveloped him at the time, he still cannot forget it. That momentum was so terrifying, I will never forget it. Li Ang. St. Charles clenched his teeth, blood dripping from the corners of his mouth. He almost forgot that even his front teeth were broken a few times by Li Ang. Quick, send me to treatment. Charles Rose took a deep breath and gave the order directly. In front of these navies, his identity as a celestial dragon can be effectively withdrawn. But in front of Li Ang, the Tianlong people are like dung, useless. St. Charles, you are actually injured. Who is it that dares to hurt you? The navy soldier was stunned for a moment, and after seeing the pale face of St. Charles Rose, he was shocked and quickly asked. This can make up for it. Tianlong people, how could they be beaten so badly? If the people above are to blame, wouldn't they say that they are not doing well? My God, I don't want to die. Thinking of this, a cold sweat dripped from the forehead of the navy soldier, and he stayed on the spot, motionless. I asked you to wake up a few people and send me to treatment. Are you deaf? Charles Rose was furious and shouted. He is in pain for a minute now. His ribs were broken, his teeth were broken, his face was swollen, and he had scars of varying degrees all over his body. Yes, yes, yes. The Navy soldier nodded and quickly woke up several companions. Chapter 175-Unlucky St. Charles Rose. The Navy soldier nodded and quickly woke up several companions. Forget about other things, the top priority is to send the Tianlong people to the medical address. Sir, be careful. The three Navy raised St. Charles Rose and whispered. They were light and carried St. Charles to the infirmary of the island. But at this speed, at least it has to go the year of the monkey and the month of the horse. Accelerate, you want me to die, don't you? St. Charles Ross shouted with anger on his face. Sir, please calm down. The three Navy said in fear, and quickened their pace. But the pace quickened, naturally, the road would be bumpy. Ah! On this bumpy road, Charles Rose's injury became more serious, he screamed loudly, his face covered with pain, and it was unbearable. This made it a little difficult for the three navies to do it. You can't go slow, you can't go fast. Be careful, there's a pit ahead. A navy's pupils shrank and said quickly. But the other two have yet to respond. Thump! St. Charles fell to the ground, and his ribs were broken even more seriously. The pain made him roar unbearably. How did you do things? I'm going to kill you. Sir, mistakes are made, we will be careful next. The three Navy were a little scared, their hands trembled and their legs were weak. They lifted St. Charles up again, but walking on the road was obviously more bumpy, because they were so frightened that their hands and feet became weak, and they trembled a little when they walked. Not to mention a bumpy path, even a flat road would still make St. Charles feel very bumpy under their emotions. This made St. Charles Ross unlucky, roaring all the way, shouting like a pig butchering, attracting a lot of attention, but he didn't dare to look at it. After Charles Rose Saint leaves, pedestrians started talking about the streets he walked through. Then, isn't that a Tianlong person? Yeah, he was beaten and seriously injured. Who is it that he acted so daringly? My God, this is too terrifying. Even the Tianlong people have been beaten beyond recognition. Moreover, with such a large number of navies on the islands today, will this situation still occur? Quote. Ah! St. Charles Rose's forehead hit the floor and hit the front. Puff! The head was broken, and blood was splattered, flowing down the ground along the trajectory. The three Navy hurriedly apologized. Sir, we didn't do it on purpose. When they reacted, they saw that St. Charles Rose had fainted, and the pain was so painful that the other party fainted unbearably. Coupled with a knock on the forehead, consciousness immediately disappeared. This way, Charles Rose Saint is extremely unlucky. Afterwards, the three Navy lifted up Charles Rose and quickly sent him to the infirmary. Originally, St. Charles Rose was only seriously injured, but there was not much danger to his life. With the stumbling along the way, St. Charles Rose is already on the verge of death. This is something no one could have imagined. It can only be said that he is so unlucky that even God can't see him. In this short journey, there were so many mistakes, and no one was there. NLT, 42 and GT. Chapter 176 The response of the 5 old stars. Chambord Islands. In a medical room, there were bursts of screams like killing pigs. Ah, it hurts, you damn bastard, I'll let you take it easy. My ribs, damn Liang, I won't kill you, I will never be human. St. Charles gritted his teeth and shouted loudly. Beside, a doctor in a white coat is treating his injuries. St. Charles, I personally recommend that you use anesthesia. The doctor practiced with cold sweat on his forehead and suggested. If it goes on like this, let alone whether it can be treated or not, even if the other party is really treated, the other party may not be able to kill him directly. Okay, use it. Charles Rose nodded and said. Immediately, the doctor took out the syringe and pierced the arm of St. Charles. Gradually, St. Charles Rose fainted. The treatment process took about 5 to 70 for 2 hours, and Charles Rose Saint also passed the dangerous period smoothly. It is not as good as the safe period. After he woke up, the first thing he asked was the 3 navies. "Where's the 3 guys who brought me here?" St. Charles Rose roared with anger on his face. "I don't know, my lord, after they came, they left." The doctor shook his head in confusion. Immediately, St. Charles Ross gritted his teeth even more. Originally, he wanted to punish these 3 guys severely. This time it's good, he can't even remember the other party's appearance. The 3 of them escaped. "Bring the phone bug." Charles Rose took a deep breath and said with a gloomy face. "Yes, my lord." The phone bug was put in his hand, and he dialed the phone bug. On the other end, there was a majestic voice. "Hello, who is it?" "Father, it's me, I'm in the Chambord archipelago. I was beaten, he almost killed me, and he can't forgive me. You must call the shots for me." St. Charles Rose cried and stated what happened before. The person opposite is naturally his father, St. Roswald. Hearing the words of St. Charles Rose, St. Roswald was furious and said, "I will go and send out the 5 old stars now, and let them dispatch all their troops to immediately rush to the Chambord Islands and destroy the auction house." Quote, "And what about Liang? He dares to do something to you, and he will never be forgiven. I will definitely kill him. You can take advantage of this time to rest well. I will handle the next thing for you." "Yes, father." After Charles Rose hung up the phone bug, his expression became particularly wonderful. Dare to do something to him, it is simply impatient to live. Thinking of this, he felt happy for a while, since St. Roswald stepped in. He can rest assured to heal here. Presumably, there will be news of a large number of troops arriving in the Chambord Islands soon. At the same time, areas far away from 10,000 meters. On the Red Soil continent, the Holy Land Mary Joa. In the Palace of the 5 Old Stars, a guest was welcomed. St. Roswald personally rushed to the residence of the 5 Old Stars. "What's the matter?" The 5 old men of the 5 Old Stars, sitting in different positions, looked at St. Roswald and asked. In terms of status, the status of the 5 Old Stars is higher than that of ordinary Tianlong people. The real rulers of the world government are the 5 of them. Few people know that above the 5 of them, there is also a king of Tianlong people. Chapter 176-5 Old Stars Responses. NLT, 43 and GT. Few people know that above the 5 of them, there is also a king of Tianlong people. But this king did not come forward easily, these little things would not disturb him at all. So, before the king was dispatched, all matters are solely the responsibility of the 5 Old Stars. Even the rest of the Tianlong people did not dare to be presumptuous in front of them. "My child was beaten in the Tianlong people. This is simply despising the majesty of the Tianlong people. My daughter was kidnapped and my son was beaten. We must seek justice." St. Roswald's face was full of anger and his tone was low. His daughter was kidnapped, which made him feel happy. Immediately afterwards, his son was beaten and seriously injured, which aroused his inner anger. "Who?" Among the 5 Old Stars, a man wearing a kimono and holding a long knife asked. "His name is Liang, and in the next few days, I must hear the news of his death." St. Roswald's eyes flashed coldly, and said lightly, "Liang." The 5 Old Stars looked at each other, and their faces gradually became solemn. Even though the strength of the 5 of them is quite terrifying, if they want to fight against Liang, their hearts are still very heavy. In this era, there is only one person who can make them feel heart palpitations in terms of combat power. This person, even Liang. If there is nothing too important, they don't want to involve Liang. "Tell it all out." The Tianlong man with a mark on his head reprimanded in a deep voice. "My son, I was going to destroy the auction house and destroy the testimony of Tianlong's shame. However, he was interrupted by Liang, the owner of the auction house, and severely injured my son. Isn't this despising the majesty of the Tianlong people? If such people are allowed to exist in this world, at that time, who else will be afraid of the Tianlong people? Saint Roswald's face was gloomy and he said slowly. Didn't I warn you before? That auction house, don't move. The tall and thin Tianlong person raised his brows and said coldly. This world, without any existence, is something we cannot move. Saint Roswald raised his head and said very proudly. Hearing this, Wu Laoxing's eyelids jumped and he said bluntly, I warned you, but you insist on doing your own thing, who is to blame? Now, we don't have any extra power to allocate to deal with Liang. I can tell you this clearly. Quote. What kind of thing is Liang? Let you be so scared. Could it be that he can be so peaceful after hitting the Tianlong people? The face of Saint Roswald showed thick anger and shouted loudly. Watch your tone of voice. Among the Tianlong people, the old man with a long knife frowned and said. In front of them, they dare to take such an attitude, which can easily arouse their dissatisfaction. Don't you guys want to deal with 0.8? Saint Roswald took a deep breath and questioned in a calm voice. It's not that we don't want to, but we don't have the ability to deal with it at the moment. Your son didn't die, he was just seriously injured. It's a lesson to him. I already told you not to touch the auction house, but unfortunately, you didn't listen to it. Quote. What's wrong now, who's to blame? The 5 old stars opened their mouths and said bluntly. Fine, I see. Saint Roswald laughed in anger, laughed a few times, took a deep look at the 5 old stars, and left with a flick of his sleeves. Looking at the back of Saint Roswald, the 5 old stars fell into silence. Liang put heavy pressure on them. A fat 5 old star, expressionless, thought for a moment, said, Liang's strength is too strong. At present, it is best not to be an enemy of him. I agree. Second. Quote. NLT, 44 and GT. Chapter 177 Tianlong People Conspiracy. After Saint Roswald left the address of the 5 old stars, he was extremely depressed and angry, and had nowhere to scatter. He gritted his teeth and kicked the tree trunk next to him. These 5 immortals don't even care if something happened to us now. If it weren't for us, what would they be? It's better now. My son has an accident, and they don't care. Besides, my daughter is also missing, and they can't do anything about it. Damn it, I can't take this breath if I don't think of a way. Saint Roswald thought so in his heart, and the more he thought about it, the more angry he became. He is a Tianlong person. When has he suffered such anger? In the past, when he saw people who were unhappy, he could directly kill them to vent his anger. But now, they can't even be a pariah. Thinking of this, he took a deep breath, his eyes flashed coldly, and he had a plan in his heart. Good. Since you don't help me get ahead, I'll find someone else. I am sure they will be very interested. Someone offended the Tianlong people, and they naturally couldn't swallow it. As long as so many of us join forces, will we still be afraid of a pariah? Joke. Immediately, Saint Roswald turned left and right, and walked a few times in the 17th place of Mary Joa. Soon, he went back to his home alone. As expected, one after another, gorgeously dressed Tianlong people came to his home one after another. Altogether, there are 11 people in total. 11 celestial dragons, if they were placed outside, would have to send naval admirals to protect them. Saint Roswald, are you telling the truth? A fat celestial dragon, looking at Saint Roswald, asked. His name is Dagusheng, and the people present are of equal status. Among the celestial dragon people, in addition to the terrifying king, there are 5 old stars, and most of them have equal identities. Of course. There are also different factions here. Different factions represent different organizational strengths of the dragon people. The group of celestial dragons summoned by Saint Roswald all came from the diversion forces of the same celestial dragon. I want to ask you all to help me. Saint Roswald took a deep breath and said slowly. Seeing that his daughter and son have been bullied to such a degree, how can he bear it? The reason why so many heavenly dragons were summoned was to discuss this matter and how to deal with it better. If the 5 old stars don't deal with it, then we will unite together. We still don't believe it, so many people can't deal with a pariah. That's right, mere pariah, dare to do something to us Tianlong people, he is impatient. By the way, Brother Roswald, do you have any news about your daughter? Hearing this, Saint Roswald shook his head heavily and said, no. At this time, De Gusheng frowned and asked, when you and I decided to let your daughter marry my son, the time is coming. If there is an accident at this time, if it is reasonable, I will do my best to help you. Thank you very much. Saint Roswald nodded, showing a forced smile. He didn't even know the life and death of his daughter. The original marriage contract was settled between him and De Gusheng. Moreover, even the Shalulia Palace and the son of the other party have not met, it is just a marriage contract made by the parents of both parties. Chapter 177_Tianlong People Conspiracy, NGT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. NLT, 45 NGT. Moreover, even the Shalulia Palace and the son of the other party have not met, it is just a marriage contract made by the parents of both parties. But now, because of the disappearance of Zaluria Palace, the engagement had to end without a hitch. Otherwise, he and De Gusheng are already in-laws. Everyone, our main thing right now is to kill the pariah, and we'll discuss the rest later. I'm so sorry to worry about my daughter. However, it's hard to find news about her for a while now. So, the most important thing for today is to kill that pariah and speak out for our Tianlong people. We want everyone in the world to know that we are Tianlong people. A solemn expression appeared on Saint Roswald's face. Lang Lang said. That's right. De Gust nodded in agreement. The rest of the Tianlong people nodded, and everyone nodded in agreement with a burst of anger. The majesty of the Tianlong people, in their eyes, absolutely cannot be provoked. And now, even the 5 old stars are unwilling to do it, so only so many of them are united and ready to attack and kill the so-called Li Ang. My plan is this. Saint Roswald continued, each family dispatched 2 killers, a total of 22 killers, to the Chambord Islands to assassinate the pariah. What do you think, everyone? 2 killers. This Li Ang is not easy. De Gusheng frowned, thought for a moment, and said, as far as I know, it can be confirmed that this Li Ang is quite terrifying. Ordinary killers really can't help him. So, we must be prepared. Everyone, we can't relax, and we can't be perfunctory at will. Saint Roswald said in a solemn tone. Not all Tianlong people are fools, they are very clear about Li Ang's strength level. A terrifying figure that can make the 5 old stars fear, is naturally not a generalist. But, even so, it was still hard to resist their desire to kill Li Ang. I will dispatch the 2 people I trained in my family. They are my absolute loyalists. Besides, they are not bad at all and are proficient in assassination. A Tianlong man said bluntly without thinking. In the face of this kind of thing, they were not stingy at all, and they came out completely, standing on the same front to deal with Li Ang. The rest spoke up. I also dispatched 2 elite killers, and their failure rate has always remained at 0. Every time they make a shot, they will kill the enemy 797 without any mistakes. I have sent 2 here too. Me too, 2 elite killers, already in place. Quote. Saint Roswald's face was excited, his eyes flashed coldly, and he said, this time, let the damn pariah understand. We Tianlong people are not easy to mess with. If he dares to do something to us Tianlong people, he will be killed. Consequences. That's right. The dignity of our Tianlong people cannot be desecrated by untouchables. De Gusheng nodded solemnly and shouted. Everyone opened their mouths with confidence. Don't worry too much, holy brother Roswald. This time, we will let those pariahs understand that pariahs are pariahs and can never be compared to us. De Guichen patted Saint Roswald on the shoulder and smiled comfortingly. Untouchables dare to attack Tianlong people, only one death. Saint Roswald's eyes narrowed slightly, and the cold light flickered. Afterwards, the crowd dispersed. The same day, in the Holy Land Mary Joa, 22 men and women dressed in black set foot on the warship and gradually rushed to the Chambord Islands. These 22 people represented the 11 Tianlong people who fought back against Liang. Moreover, these 22 killers have a very high level of strength. They have gone through a variety of assassination missions, and the completion rate is quite high. Most of them are minions under the hands of Tianlong people. It's just that it has never been shown by the Tianlong people. NLT, 46 and GT. Chapter 178_Kazuna, What Can I Do? Chambord Islands. Outside the auction. A group of navies gradually woke up, and the scene of more than 20,000 navies was simply breathtaking. A group of onlookers gathered around, looking at a group of navy who fell to the ground, full of emotion and shock, talking about it for unknown reasons. More than 20,000 people just fainted. If it's one or two, that's fine. If so many people faint at the same time, it's their own problem that they can't explain it. Could it be that someone killed more than 20,000 people in an instant? How terrible is that? Quote. What's the situation? Numerous navy patted their heads in confusion, their faces full of doubts. They don't even know what's going on. A long time. Finally, some people recalled and lost their voices. It was the person from before. He used a very strange ability to knock us all down. That's right, it's him. Fortunately, he didn't have the intention to kill, otherwise, we would all have to die here. Many navies recalled the previous picture, and their spines were wet with cold sweat. For a moment, they were enveloped by the terrifying momentum, lost consciousness, and fell to the ground. Looking back now, they still feel the throbbing of the heart. This kind of terrifying enemy, how could they be the opponent's opponent? They just rushed to death. Where's St. Charles Rosé? Some navies panicked and shouted loudly. Hurry back and tell the truth to General Huang Yuan. The 20,000-odd navy came and went quickly. In a blink of an eye, everyone was confused and fled the auction. The scene of being instantly killed is still frozen in their minds and cannot be forgotten. The naval branch stationed in the Chambord Islands. Inside the house. Kazaru crossed Erlang's legs and lay down on the chair with a leisurely expression on his face. During this time, he had to stay in the Chambord Islands to guard. Although he has returned to Marin Bando, the affairs here in the Chambord Islands still need a general to guard them. Naturally, he was dispatched to the Chambord Islands again. Unless ordered by the Marshal of the Warring States period, he will stay in the Chambord Islands all the time. There is a monster next to me, I can't let go of my heart all the time. The corner of Huang Yuan's mouth moved slightly, looking particularly helpless, said. However, according to his lazy personality, life here is also easy. Pirates will not deliberately appear in people's sight, and he will have a lot of strength left to lie down and sleep here. He prefers the Chambord Islands to the days of Marin Bando. Except that there is a terrifying monster here, which makes him very unnatural, everything else seems too beautiful. Dong dong dong. At this moment, the door was knocked. Come in. The yellow monkey's face was calm, and he said lightly. Crunch. A navy was anxious, opened the door, walked in front of Huang Yuan, and blurted out, General Huang Yuan, something is bad. What's the matter? Speak slowly. Kazuna yawned, looking very calm. But what happened next made his expression very exciting. Sir Charles Rose assembled more than 20,000 navies just now to deal with the population auction site. Moreover, the population auction site has been surrounded. In the end, St. Charles Rose was severely injured and is still recovering in the infirmary. And the 20,000-odd navy has now returned. The scene they described at the time seemed to be instantly killed by one person. Chapter 178_Kazuna, What Can I Do? And GT, page 1/2. Please click the next page to continue reading. And LT, 47 and GT. And the 20,000-odd Navy has now returned. The scene they described at the time seemed to be instantly killed by one person. When the Navy finished speaking, Huang Yuan's face changed dramatically, his brows furrowed, and he said solemnly, "Why didn't you notify me in advance?" This. The sailor hesitated, not daring to speak. The status of St. Charles Rose is too high, and they, the lower-level personnel, are caught in the middle. Whatever they do is the wrong choice. This idiot, how dare he attack the auction house? If it were so easy, I would have razed the auction house to the ground long ago. Even I didn't dare to act rashly. He thought that he could lead the auction house with more than 20,000 Navy. Destroyed. It's the funniest joke I've ever heard. Now, how are they? Huang Yuan was full of anger and cursed. They were only shocked by their brains, and the injuries were not much. On the contrary, it was Lord Charles Rose, who was directly beaten out of bed. Today, he is still receiving treatment. The sailor told the truth. Take me to see them. Kizaru stood up from his chair and said. These people are all his temporary subordinates, and they all have to look at the injuries of these people. After arriving at the hospital, Huang Yuan looked at the patients who filled up the hospital, raised his brows, and said, all of them were sent here for treatment. Yes, although they are not in serious trouble, they still want to observe it. The sailor nodded and said. When Kayabu stepped into the intensive medical room in front, the eyes of many Navy, swoosh, were fixed on Kizaru's body, shouting with suffocation and pain on his face. Quote. General Yellow Monkey, you have to call the shots for us. The person from the auction house dared to even beat the Lord Charles Rose. Moreover, he despised the king's law and did not take our Navy in the eyes at all. That's right, that guy's strength is terrifying. Only you, General Huang Yuan, can handle him with confidence. Quote. Facing the words of many Navy, Kayabu formed a horizontal character, Chuan, on his forehead. His face was bad, and he roared, You guys, do you want me to die? Ha, ah. Numerous navies fell into silence, not saying a word. They couldn't understand why Kizaru said these words. Could it be that the backing of that auction house is really so terrible? Even General Yellow Monkey can't be shaken. General Yellow Monkey, can't you handle it at all? A navy asked weakly. The owner of that auction house is Li Yang. Huang Yuan took a deep breath. Qian's good. The corners of his mouth moved slightly, and he said solemnly. Silence. The whole place was silent. It turns out, it was Li Yang. No wonder, even General Huang Yuan dared not act rashly. Then the person they met at that time was Li Yang. Oh my God, I almost teetered on the brink of death. The person we shot was actually Li Yang. Fortunately, he didn't kill us, otherwise, all of us would have to die there. Quote. Looking back now, the Navy realizes how dangerous the scene at that time was. General Yellow Monkey, is that the case? A Navy gritted his teeth and asked. Many eyes were once again fixed on Kizaru's body. Hearing this, Huang Yuan almost fell to the ground, and immediately scolded, What can I do? If you can do it, you will trouble him. And LT, 48 and GT. Chapter 179 _ The killer is in place. Anyway, I don't know about you guys. So, even if you guys are wiped out, I can only pat your butt and leave. I won't avenge you, you can do it for your own good. The Yellow Monkey said bluntly with a depressed expression on his face. He really didn't want to deal with these troublesome things, and provoke the monster Li Yang. There are not so many generals fighting side by side with him. Once he fights with Li Yang, his result can hang. When the joint siege of Li Yang was carried out, he was the first person to be severely injured. So that now he has a psychological shadow on Liang. Admiral Kazuna, we are the Navy, isn't it normal to catch pirates? That's right, what if it's Liang, we represent justice. General, you have changed. You didn't treat pirates like this before. Quote. Many navies whispered and murmured. Fuck your motherfucker. Huang Yuan raised his brows and cursed. Who told you that Liang is a pirate? You are provoking trouble. I tell you, Liang is a legal citizen. 17. Ah. Many navies were stunned. It seems. It's really such a thing. Liang is really not a pirate, but they preconceive that Liang is a pirate. What you do yourself, do it yourself. You can do whatever you like. Anyway, if you provoke Liang, if you are killed, you will only blame yourself. Huang Yuan was impatient, waved his hand, and left here directly. Originally, he was in a very good mood, however, he was confused by these stupid naval soldiers. To provoke Liang. He has no doubts about his longevity. After Kizaru left, the Navy here also opened their mouths and said helplessly. Forget it, we are not Liang's opponents at all. Furthermore, even General Huang Yuan said so, we dealt with Liang in the past. This is just a death sentence. Who knows, the owner of the auction house is actually a monster like Liang. I'm afraid Lord Charles Rose won't let it go. Quote. Everyone was talking and feeling very sad. The words Liang put a lot of pressure on them. Coupled with Kizaru's attitude, they made their choice even more clear. At this time, choosing to provoke Liang would be self-defeating. After leaving the infirmary, Kazuna was in a bad mood, and he was no longer in the mood to sleep when he returned to the office. This group of ignorant guys, and the idiot of St. Charles. Can Liang provoke anyone? There is no order from the world government that can show that even the 5 old stars are unwilling to provoke Liang. He is a mere Tianlong person who wants to shake such a terrifying existence. It is simply whimsical. Deserving it, being beaten half to death. Kizaru thought angrily in his heart, but he didn't dare to speak at will. The words of a person of his level are very energetic. For the bad words of Tianlong people, you can think in your heart, but you can't say it out. Once someone else catches the handle, it will be troublesome. Liang, this monster, really is. Kizaru felt helpless when he thought of Liang's terrifying strength. I felt a deep sense of powerlessness in my heart. There is no way, it is still too far for him to deal with Liang alone. Even Akainu and Aokiji, the 3 generals will come together. In addition, Lieutenant General Garp, Marshal Wardrum and other 5 people stood on the same front to besiege Liang. In such a battle situation, Kizaru didn't think that Liang would be killed by them. Although they may suppress Liang, it is still too difficult to kill Liang. Chapter 179 _ The killer is in place, please customize it. NLT, 49 and GT. Although they may suppress Liang, it is still too difficult to kill Liang. Once they are scattered and Liang destroys them one by one, they will all be killed. Call out. In the blink of an eye, the yellow monkey turned into a ball of golden light and disappeared in place. A few days later. Chambord Islands. The location of the port. People come and go, very lively. As the number of navies increases, the number of pirates decreases. But the people who didn't decrease were businessmen. Therefore, the location of the port, as always, is very crowded and very lively. Businessmen and pedestrians come and go, chatting happily. A big event happened a few days ago, do you know? I know, 20,000 navies were instantly killed in the auction area. In an instant, more than 20,000 navies were incapacitated, as if they had the power of a god. The background of the auction house is too great. After the Tianlong people were severely injured, there was no general assembly to attack the auction house. This is unprecedented. The Tianlong people suffered a big loss, and the Navy headquarters did not respond, which is a bit intriguing. Quote. Suddenly, a man pointed ahead with a smile on his face, and said, "Look, another warship is coming. The Chambord Islands are quite safe these days. No, the more the Navy, the fewer the pirates. In this way, we don't have to worry about being harassed by the pirates." The rest of the commoners nodded in agreement and smiled. In the sea area ahead, a warship was gradually approaching. The sea rippled and swayed with the wind. The warship made a deep mark, and the sea was pushed aside to both sides, and the water surface was rippling. On board, 22 men and women in black stood, about 16 and 6 women. They were dressed uniformly, but the woman showed off her proud figure. But their expressions were the same, and there was no expression on everyone's face, not even emotional waves, and while they were still, a chilling aura emerged spontaneously. Specializing in the 657 industry will not change his inner calm because of any situation. In other words, they are already killing machines. Emotionless murderers, that's them. Trained to the extreme by the Tianlong people, they are only responsible for the task, and other things are not what they need to think about. The only thing they have to think about is how to effectively kill the target. It's here. A man's mouth moved slightly and his voice was cold. On his body, there is an icy aura, as if the environment is a few degrees below zero. Read through the target. A woman took out a portrait and handed it to everyone. Everyone took over the portrait and deeply remembered the face of the person in the portrait in their minds. Memory is also an indispensable ability as a killer. Destroy it. The person who finally took over the portrait, after remembering the characters in the portrait, threw the paper of the portrait into the sea next to him. The sea floats. The portrait was gradually stained wet and sank to the bottom of the sea. And the people in the portraits gradually disappeared from people's sight. One look. The person in this portrait is holding a knife, and beside him, a huge sea fortress is divided into two. This person is naturally Li Ang. The scene in the picture is exactly when Li Ang destroyed the G4 branch. Chapter 180 _ People Slave. Chambord Islands. Next to the population auction, in a house. Your eldest brother has returned to the Chambord Islands. The corners of Li Ang's mouth moved slightly, and he smiled lightly. He looked at the Shalulia Palace in front of him, his expression inexplicable, and his eyes shone brightly. Standing in front of him, the Shalulia Palace, wearing pure white clothes, in the delicate facial features, a noble atmosphere permeates, but it is also full of another completely different kind of slave temperament. I see. She lowered her head and said, "Sir, did you kill him?" No, I just hurt him. If I kill him, it will cause a lot of trouble. Keeping him alive will also have your face." Li Ang shook his head, lay on the sofa, and said bluntly. The current Zaluria Palace is completely subdued under Li Ang's majesty. The majesty of the Tianlong people is gone. The rest is just the uncontrollable pride accumulated over the years. In the eyes of ordinary people, she is an unattainable Tianlong person. In Li Ang's eyes, she is a slave. A Draco slave. After these days of taming, Zaluria Palace has become completely honest, and basically, there is no possibility of escape. Even the restless heart was tamed to be peaceful. Sit over and rub my shoulders for me. Li Ang leaned back on the sofa, raised his head and looked at the ceiling, commanding. Yes, my lord. Shalulia Palace nodded, took a pair of long, straight, snow-white legs, walked behind Li Ang, and slowly stretched out a slender hand to massage on Li Ang's shoulders. The massage technique is rough. It can be seen that this kind of behavior is the first time she has done it in her life. In the past, as a noble Tianlong person, how could she massage others? At this moment, after being Li Ang's slave, she can only put aside her identity as a Tianlong person, be a perfect slave, and obey Li Ang's dispatch. Feeling the soft touch on his shoulders, Li Ang narrowed his eyes slightly. Although it is not very comfortable, at least, it is quite comfortable to enjoy the time served by Tianlong people. This comfort comes from psychological, not physical. Being able to tame the noble Tianlong people gave Li Ang a deep sense of satisfaction. In essence, Tianlong people are no different from ordinary people, but only in terms of identity. But it is because of the difference in identities that the arrogant Tianlong people are tamed, and the satisfaction is beyond the table. Li Ang slowly stretched out his hand, grabbed the pure white jade hand of Sha Lulia Palace, and pulled it in front of him. Sha Lulia Palace was frightened, exclaimed, and the whole body fell forward. At the same time, Li Ang took advantage of the situation to spread out his hands, and directly hugged the slender waist of Sha Lulia Palace, feeling the soft and smooth skin, and the touch made people daydream. Chapter 180 Tianlong People Slave. NLT, 51 and GT. Li Ang took advantage of the situation to spread out his hands, and directly hugged the slender waist of Sha Lulia Palace, feeling the soft and smooth skin, and the touch made people daydream. Immediately, Sha Lulia Palace's pretty face turned red. Her eyes didn't dare to look directly at Li Ang. She kept looking around, her heart pounding. Sha Lulia Palace's figure is still worthy of recognition. As a mature woman, her figure is quite perfect. The skin is flawless, with fine pores and snow white. Sha Lulia Palace was completely weak. Her hands hugged Li Ang's neck, her pretty face blushed, her mouth spit like blue, and she leaned on the latter's shoulder. In particular, she felt that the strangeness of her body made her almost unbearable. Li Ang stared at Sha Lulia Palace, the corners of his mouth curled up, his eyes full of aggression. He gradually approached the other party's delicate face, and Sha Lulia Palace lowered her head, her blushing face, red in the white, indescribably beautiful. Both contact. After a minute, Li Ang smiled and looked at the Sha Lulia Palace with blurred eyes. There was still a sweet taste in the corner of his mouth. He sipped and felt it carefully. Hearing this, Sha Lulia Palace felt even more ashamed in her heart. The shirt slipped slightly, revealing her white shoulders, with a hint of pink. Sha Lulia Palace's face was rosy, staring at Li Ang in front of him, motionless. Li Ang's eyes were fixed on the former's body, carefully observing every inch, not letting go. Aware of Li Ang's gaze, Sha Lulia Gong lowered her head, like a frightened little woman, her eyes twinkled brightly, with a bit of mood swings. But overall, Sha Lulia Palace was still very shy. Eye to eye. A long time. There was an intriguing sound coming from the room, which made people unable to help being attracted. There was an inexplicable smell in the air. Outside the house, there is a quiet atmosphere with no one disturbing. The Chambord Islands are bustling with people, but few people approach this area. This house seems to be independent, and people dare not approach it easily, let alone the idea of approaching here. On the sky, the hot sun shone down and illuminated the entire Chambord Islands. The green Wang Haojiao leaves are crystal clear, like sapphire, and there is still a trace of water mist that is gradually evaporated. Shaqi's ripping off. Inside the pub, Rayleigh was holding a wine glass. His eyes flashed a gleam, and he looked out the door. Shachi held the cigarette and looked at Rayleigh slowly with a smile, and said, "What's wrong? It feels like there is a murderous aura." Rayleigh narrowed his eyes slightly and said with a smile, "Maybe, it may be my illusion. However, their direction is not from our position. Therefore, with us, there is not much of a problem." Contacted. That's right, I really don't know when the Navy will leave. Shachi's eyes flickered, caught in a rush, and said with a sigh,